It's 5:30, it's alright, not you specifically, Barbara, you don't need to apologise. It's 5:30, so we're about to commence the meeting of the Planning Committee, Monday the 25th of April. I'm going to start with apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, Alex?
Councillors Bionic and Sparks.
Councillor Bionic and Sparks, we just like to wish the best to Councillor Bionic as he drives towards Luton, and a safe journey bringing back his cousins from the Ukraine, which I think we're all just a little bit happy about. Anyway, moving on, can I have your agreement that the minutes are an accurate representation of the last meeting? Everybody happy with that? Okay, they're approved. Just a reminder that if there are any declarations of interest, you should declare them.
Thank you, Chair. Item number 2.
Thank you very much, Councillor Branson. On item number 2, I'll remind you again so you can leave the room when we get there, okay? Or actually, item number 6, in the running order to cause confusion. Item number 4, Access to Information Act. There was no reason that we were going to part 2 tonight, so the whole meeting should be in part 1. And we go to the first item on the agenda, which is the planning application 211864 full former Exeter Royal Academy for the deaf at Tottenham Road, Exeter. Mike Higgins? No? Cameron's doing that one.
There he is on my laptop. So it's the application. It's on Tottenham Road, the former Exeter Royal Academy, or part of the former Exeter Royal Academy of Deaf Education site. And first of all, just to draw your attention to a couple of matters on the update sheet. One is to update section 11, and that's on representations we received, and to report that the petition received 952 signatures. And the wording of the petition is repeated in the update sheet, but it is in section 11 of the report, which is updating the number of signatures. The second update is a tweak to the Part A of the recommendations, and that's to include the delegation authority, not just in the service lead city development, but to delegate to service lead in consultation with the chair of planning and portfolio holder. Further updates on the report in section 18, the list of conditions. There are 2 conditions where we're awaiting wording at the time of the report. One is condition 3, which is the contamination and remediation. We are still working through the procedural points on that. We're satisfied that it has been assessed and analysed properly on the site, and in fact the previous conditions attached to the previous development have already been discharged. However, there is a procedural point that requires those conditions in the contamination and remediation to be dealt with again, procedure on this application. And at this point in time, we can recommend our standard wording on contamination and remediation. Given the exact wording to the class, but it's just requiring contamination studies to be submitted, remediation to be agreed, and that to be carried out, and remediation statement to be submitted post-remediation. And then condition 15 regarding noise, which is around the experience of the occupiers of the development and how they experience external noise. We have now received additional details, and the condition wording is to secure the...
It's not going to grow anything, so that needs to know a bit more. Do you have to speak on later?
Yeah, just on the sounds better. Condition 15, just to say it's a condition wording that secures the measures set out in the acoustic assessment we now received. Those measures being acceptable, those measures should be implemented and maintained. So the site is as you see before you on the screen. It is a part of the former E-Raid site. It's the part that borders Tottenham Road and bounds Weirfield Road and the junction of those 2 roads. So this is an aerial view of the site. It shows it prior to demolition and commencement of redevelopment of the permitted scheme. Photos of the site as it is currently. In the foreground, you can see an access on the left, which is the construction access. which gives access for all three parts of the scheme. We'll talk about those in all three phases, including the application site construction access directly from Topsham Road. You can see the site in the sort of middle of the picture there. It is the church is on the far side of Weirfield Road, and the trees immediately in front of it are on the application site. So Weirfield Road goes off to the left down the site, and you can see the terrace of houses sticking down the hill, which is beyond the application site, the site having been cleared. You'll also notice the consent for the redevelopment of the wider E-Rate site required certain highway works to be done before construction commenced. So you can see that the footway has already been widened, and some of the other highway works as we go around the site will see it being carried out prior to commencement of development as well. So another photograph back from the junction of Weirfield Road. So you can see looking down Weirfield Road on the right hand side of the screen. Assuming you can got a little window over it. But you can see down, see the terrace of houses in Weirfield Road. You can see the trees on the application site, and the application site is immediately in front of you. You can see the signalised crossing, and just to the left of that picture is the access we're talking about, the layout, which is pull in from Topsham Road for drop-offs, collections, deliveries, and access to the site of that nature. The site, the shopping back along Topsham Road, the site on your left, just to illustrate the access to the church. You've got a footway access that slopes up on the right hand side, and vehicle access in between the two pillars in the centre of the picture. This is a photograph looking up Weirfield Road at the bottom end of the site. You can see the access point to the site. The immediate foreground is not being used for construction access, and right in the foreground of the picture you can see the build-out and pedestrian crossing that's been built in Weirfield Road prior to commencement of the development of the wider site. And this is a shot prior to commencement of development, just to show the access that was in the application previously, which gave access to a single dwelling that was part of the E-Rate site. So part of the background is the planning history of the site. There were two previous consents. The principal consent came to committee in 2018, 2017-1640. That was for essentially three tranches of development which are now being carried out separately. Two of them are on site, so 146 new houses are being built, houses and flats, I should say, dwellings. Those are being built, those are currently on site. There's also a care home, which is at the lower end of Weirfield Road, access through the access point which is looked at. That is on site under construction, but it is the corner of the site, the third element, which was consented, 61 units of assisted living, which we now have an application for 84 1 and 2 bed age restricted dwellings. So this is a slide showing the wider E-Rate development that's permitted. The 146 dwellings shown in darker on the eastern part of the site with an access in the centre from Topsham Road. A green space separating the residential dwellings from what was consented as assisted living. We now have the application, and lower down on Weirfield Road we have the care home, which is in construction. The assisted living block and the care home block were consented as access from Weirfield Road. You can see that access point on Weirfield Road on the left-hand side of the layout. Also note at that stage the pull-in access from Topsham Road is also consented.
Speak up a little bit more from outside.
Apologies. So this is the site layout for the scheme. It shows a block in a U-shape arranged around the central courtyard, which is open to the south. The wing of the boat on Weirfield Road is 3-storey, and it steps down as Weirfield Road descends south, so it's split. The block facing Topsham Road is 3 stories on its junction with Weirfield Road. Topsham Road rises to 4 stories, and the wing of the building that fronts the open space within the site is 4 stories on its frontage, and as it steps down the site it becomes 5 stories before going back to 4 stories. The access from Deferred Road gives access to a turning end and 28 parking spaces. There's bin storage, cycle storage, and electric buggy storage on the left-hand side of the entrance, which is the area shown in blue. The application has been amended since first submitted to reposition the entrance to give better, and the reception to give better visibility over the parking places and to give more privacy and a quieter environment in the central garden corridor. And say the levels of the site split, so this is the lower ground floor, so it's the lower part of the site. You can see the entrance to the left-hand side, the reception, some of the common dining and lounge areas. So you've got through the site, you need a full floor plan, and then it is 1 and 2 bed apartments served by 2 lift cores, and there is in the top left of this plan the access goes out to that pulling from Topsham Road to give access to collections and deliveries. So first floor, similar. Second floor starts to cut back. The building reduces the floor plans and the upper floor plates. Cuts back again, and on each of those floor plans identifies potential locations for solar photovoltaics on the flat roofs, and this shows in blue the photovoltaics on the upland roofs that are proposed as part of the scheme. So these elevations from Topsham Road. Elevation from Weirfield Road, and the sort of street scene elevation on the top there, showing how the building sort of cuts into the slope, and a full elevation below. And the elevation from the south looking to the courtyard, seeing the 2 blocks, the 2 ends. And the elevation towards the green space in the centre of the drain site. This is comparative elevation, so this is the elevation towards Topsham Road. On the bottom you can see the consented scheme on the top proposed, and there is a blue line drawn on the bottom which you might not be able to make out, but essentially it shows that the scheme being applied for is slightly lower than the consented scheme. This is Weirfield Road, so again the buildings are slightly lower. Also note on the lower scheme the balconies extend further across towards the right, whereas on the proposed scheme on the top, the balconies terminate where the first part of the building steps down, so they don't actually directly oppose houses on Weirfield Road. This is the elevation towards the green space. So the recommendation is that the application should be approved subject to affordable housing being agreed. So the application in this instance is for C3 dwellings, which would come under our policy for affordable housing. Given the nature of the scheme and the service charges and the single block design, it is unlikely that registered social landlords will be interested in managing a small number of apartments within a larger block, which would have higher service charges and so on. So in this instance, and because of the constrained nature of this part of the site, officers consider it appropriate for the affordable housing to be delivered as off-site. And as set out in affordable housing SPD, hierarchy of how we approach that is either you deliver it as development in tandem, or you deliver it as a purchase off-site, and in this case that would be our first. The first way we'd expect it to be delivered, and if not, then through a commuted sum delivered to deliver the affordable housing off-site. We calculate the affordable housing on a complete development basis, so taking into account the units on the site and the affordable units delivered off-site, and take 35% of those. And in this case, the affordable housing, policy compliant affordable housing offer will be 45.23 units. We haven't the analysis and the viability assessment is ongoing. We haven't concluded that, but given that it is off-site, we feel that it's appropriate in this instance that we can make a recommendation to members that affordable housing offer is concluded. We don't need to do that before we bring the application to committee. The physical development shown would not be changed by that affordable housing offer. The 106 would also secure NHS GP service contribution of £42,000 and could secure a sustainable travel plan. One of the issues on site is whether or not there is sufficient cycle parking, and on the layout there is an area for cycle parking and buggy parking with electric vehicle charging. We feel is sufficient to deliver appropriate amount of cycle and buggy parking. We think that can be best delivered to meet the exact needs of the actual occupants through a sustainable travel plan which will be reviewed every year. So we talked about the petition that's been received, but we've also drawn attention to 118 objections, and whilst the majority of those are transport highways matters, they also raise issues about the design and the lack of on-site affordable housing. Thank you, Chair. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Howard. You just mentioned something that's a bit remiss of me to have mentioned actually, so just to reiterate that. During full council last week, a petition was presented to council. It's been deferred or referred to us as the planning committee. It was relating to this application, so obviously we can bear that in mind as part of the objections that have been submitted as part of the application. And I'm going to open everything to questions. But can you indulge me with a couple of questions for a minute, Howard, because I'm not sure if I fully understood everything I heard. First of all, does this application change any access that already exists?
It relies on the consented access that would have been used for the assisted living scheme and the care home. The care home is under construction and the access is formed down that care home, the access from that.
And did you mention that access for deliveries for the building was from Topsham Road? Did I hear that or did I mistake that?
No, there is a pull-in from Topsham Road which can be used for deliveries, collections and so on, and there is a door giving access from the scheme directly to that pull-in access.
Thank you. And my final question is, where should construction traffic be travelling? Sorry if you told me this, I just want... There were some issues with audibility and I think it's quite important to make sure that I understand.
So that all three elements of the former E-Raid site are having their construction access in and using the green space in the centre of the site. So there is an access form there that is in place and being used by all. But the two parts of the site that are already on site will serve construction access.
So that's our agreed access to the site of construction, right? Yes. I just wanted that clarity. Councillor Mitchell, you had your hand up first.
Thank you, Chair. Following on through your questions in a way. Two questions. First of all, in the various illustrations you showed us of the designs of these properties, particularly those facing Wearfield Road, have we got any illustrations that show the impact upon the road? They looked almost like they were in splendid isolation, the pictures we were seeing. And have we got a cross-section showing the roof lines of Wearfield Road, etc., their height, distance away from these properties and the height, and whether any trees or anything else are shielding? Because it did look from the plan that they could almost be quite intrusive on the existing housing. That's one. Two, following on from Councillor Morse's question, if the main access during construction is on Topsham Road, why is that not preferred as the route for all traffic in future in and out of that site, either one or two, which then could be managed by traffic lights on Topsham Road, far easier than coming off a very narrow side road?
So firstly, the elevation you're seeing there does show a section through Wearfield Road. So the house at the top one there, the house on Wearfield Road, it does rise up, but it is showing the relationship between the two buildings. I would also remind you that the scheme that is now proposed is actually slightly lower than the previous scheme, and the balconies have been moved slightly further on Wearfield Road. So we do feel there is actually less of an impact from this scheme than from the consented scheme.
But is there any barrier between the buildings and the existing housing?
On the top part of the site there are some retaining trees, so we'll just go back up to align that plan. So you say that there is some landscaping, particularly on the uppermost part of Wearfield Road, but there is a boundary to the highway, and the building is set back from the highway. On the point on construction access, the application before us, we have to determine on its merits. It is using the same access as was previously consented, and the transport assessments do show that this will give fewer vehicle movements in the peak housed in the consented scheme. So we do have to deal with the application in front of us rather than other suggestions. And this access has been considered as part of the overall development in the site. The planning committee in 2018 found that acceptable, and we have the same access.
Is there any planning rationale for moving from off a major road to using a minor road?
In terms of the rationale, there are fewer accesses onto Topsham Road with the scheme, which might be considered in highway safety beneficial. The County Council's Highway Authority, they say that the vehicle movements are very low, and they don't consider there's any safety or other issue in having access onto Weirfield Road, and that was the case for the previous application and for this application. So there was no higher objection to that access. Thank you.
Got Councillor Hannaford, then Councillor Moore, then Councillor Denning. Okay, and then Councillor Henson.
Thank you, Chair. I will come back to other parts of the application, but I specifically wanted to ask the officers about the design and the appearance of this building at this stage. Obviously, this is a very historic part of Exeter. It needs to be seen in the context of St Leonard's Church, but also and I'm sure, I presume it's Victorian or Edwardian terraces, is it, going down Weirfield Road? Is this the right design? Is this the best design that we can have in Exeter for such a historic location? And the colour scheme of it is sort of mud brown, sort of facade, and really, Chair, to be frank, the ugliness of this building, seen in the context of where it is and leading down to the river, is this really the best that our planners think could be done? I mean, there don't seem to be any original features, anything that sort of promotes or reflects the neighbouring properties, and it's almost like some sort of factory unit, really, rather than a residential unit. And I just think, I'm not sure that's right for this conservation area.
I'm going to let Howard respond, but seeing as he often responds to me when I say taste is subjective.
Thank you. The elevations here do show on the bottom the consented scheme for an assisted living block, and on the top the proposed scheme. The applicant has come to this where there is a context of the wider E-Rate development as well, and this block does sit as a design piece with the residential parts of the site. So what we have here is a consented scheme, and actually I think there is more activity, more liveliness in the facade of the now proposed development that has more articulation through balconies, there is greater articulation in window spaces, and so on. And I do think we have to acknowledge the consented scheme as part of the context of considering this, and the fact that it sits as a part of the E-Ray redevelopment as a whole, and you will see it and understand that there was something that occupied that whole site before, because there will be a design lounge which runs through the residential parts as well as this age-restricted residential part.
Thank you. Howard, are you done, Councillor Hannaford?
Well, Chair, sorry, but I mean, in previous times, when we've had a building come forward, I'm thinking, for example, on Oakhampton Road, there was back to original features design. It's very uninspiring, Chair, I think, as a design, let alone any of the other concerns we've got. And I just think if you couldn't get something better in the conservation area, how do you get it anywhere in the city?
I think the context that we have to remember is there was already a consent to build the bottom application, so we can't undo that consent exists. So, and that was in keeping with the rest of the site. And obviously I don't know how many members were on the 2018 committee, but that was the decision that was made at the time. But I can appreciate where you're coming from, I'm not saying otherwise. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, I've got 3 points, please. So I didn't quite hear you properly when you talked about the viability assessment and affordable housing. In terms of the negotiations afterwards, can you just explain again that you will be insisting on the full quota of affordable housing? I've got 2 other questions. Do you want me to answer that? So with regards to the access point at the front on Topsham Road, and you said delivery vehicles will be required to use that. What about waste collection vehicles? Will they be accessing the site there as well? And is the requirement to use that pull-in for deliveries in larger vehicles conditioned? And my third question, which you know is coming up, is about the fact that Topsham Road is a heavily polluted road, one of the roads identified in the air quality management area. So has the air quality assessment included the cumulative impact of the traffic generated from all the sites and development in here and neighbouring? Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of the viability, the applicant has submitted a viability assessment to say that the development cannot afford to deliver a full quantity of affordable housing, and we are assessing that and will seek to secure a policy compliant scheme, but that is dependent on the viability of the scheme and its ability to deliver affordable housing. But we will be seeking a policy compliant scheme if at all possible, but we do need to work through the technicalities of the viability assessment and agree that and agree what it can afford. And the recommendation is in two parts. One, that if we can agree with the delegated powers to give officers and the chair and the portfolio holder the ability to improve the application, and if we don't agree, there's the ability to refuse the application for lack of affordable housing, and there is a reason for refusal set out in the committee report as an alternative recommendation. Secondly, the pull-in, there isn't a requirement for people to use it. It is provided there, and it does provide easy access to pull-in from Topsham Road, drop-offs and taxi collections and that sort of thing. In terms of the air quality management area, Topsham Road is part of the air quality management area where we have duty to try and reduce air pollution. The scheme as presented has fewer vehicle movements than the approved scheme. It also has electric vehicle charging points for the parking spaces. So we think the impact on the air quality management area will be lower than the approved scheme. And refuse collection, no, that will be through Weirfield Road into the centre of the site where the bin store is accessed on the lower level of the building.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Denning.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going back to what I think was the Councillor Richard's main point, and that's pedestrian access and also car access. You said about the pull-in, obviously, for the deliveries and things like that. I just don't understand if they can do that for drop-offs and whatever. Why can it not be the main entrance for vehicles for people who actually going to live there? Okay. I went down to Weirfield Road the other day. I met a lovely lady washing her car and had a good conversation with her. And she put forward to me her fears about accidents that could actually happen on that site, on the site. With where the pedestrian access is, and I might have missed it because nobody seems to have actually talked about that. There will be mobility scooters. If they have to use that particular access, if there is not wide enough access, to go up Weirfield Road on a site where only one car can get down, okay, they won't be able to go on a pavement, I assure you. There are cars parked all along there, there are no drop down, there are no dropped curbs. It's very, I would say, would be extremely dangerous. So is there pedestrian access? Now, I was on the planning committee because I am quite a new councillor, well, we're here now. So I'm going to ask something, I'm not sure if I can or not. Surely this can be looked at again, okay? Surely, because the church was looked, because it isn't a second person who's looking at this, why can they not look at doing that pedestrian access and car access along with the area where there are the drop-offs? It certainly is dangerous. And coming out of Topsham Road, okay, along there, I come out of Topsham Road, I live in Abbeyville Close. Sometimes you're playing with your life, especially if you're going to cross and go across to the other right way. We're talking about elderly people, okay, who are doing this. And when I did speak to a chap from churches, he was very pleasant and nice and said they won't be using their cars too much because there'll be what they would call basket shoppers. They will go to the local shops. But we all know there are no local shops on Topsham Road. There are a couple of funeral parlours further up the road, admittedly, okay, but there are no local shops. They will use their cars. So I'm quite concerned about this, the safety aspect. There's also the parking, okay? If parking is a premium there, it really is. And I do know that, churches have said there will be 4 spaces for people from Wakefield Road. So what I would ask as well, with church are actually saying that they would agree that nobody in there would be allowed to claim any residential parking permits. Okay, that there should be enough parking there, no parking permits, because we all love having our grandchildren there. They could get a parking permit, because I know that I would, so that my grandchildren would come and stay, and they can put in a visitor's pass and just stay there for the whole day. I would do it myself, I'm going to tell you now. So this is my concern. Pedestrian access, the cars, I think there is a problem, and I do wonder about the mobility scooters and the public dangerous there.
This is a question rather than debate. You've got me excited. I know you're new, and this is the first time you really spoke that. So next time there's a question, ask the question, do that bit later, but don't forget to do it again today. Okay.
Yes, just to identify the pedestrian access, there is a pedestrian access from the upper floor onto upper ground floor onto Topsham Road. So there is a pedestrian access onto Topsham Road, and there is access with the crossing points. There's no footway on the eastern side of Wakefield Road, so there is a build out which has been put in to narrow it to make it easier for people to cross and use Wakefield Road as well. So there are 2 pedestrian points of access to the site. And that's the only question.
No.
Chair, can I come in? I think the context we've got here, members, is we've got a consented scheme. I appreciate concerns about the access on Wakefield Road. They can build that, and they have. They've provided an additional 4 parking spaces for residents there. Essentially, from a planner's perspective, that is there. We are where we are. The previous permission allowed that, and essentially we've got to accept the application, not accept as in approve. This is what they're applying for, and it is there already. I just want to make sure that context, we can't go back and change a decision that's gone before. We can look at this and the elements that have changed, but that's about it, unfortunately.
Thank you, Barry. You saved me from saying that later. I'm going to carry on because Councillor Henson and Councillor Sutton put up their hands, and I'll come back to you in a minute as long as it's a question, Councillor. Councillor Henson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm asking for the legality and the haste that this has received. We received it at full council on Tuesday. You couldn't possibly look at what the petition has asked you to look at or re-look at. You would have Wednesday, Thursday and Friday and today. I'm asking this as a solicitor here, our solicitor, would we have had time to consider the facts of what the petition was asking to re-look at? Secondly, if the answer would be, well, I'm not really answering that question, let me say, are we uptight with the development to be agreed in time that development has for us to agree with, yea or nay? The other is that I would have, if I'd have seen this before, would have seen the fact that the design is absolutely appalling for the area it is in. And the fact that that is an old area, it's a protected area, where the hell are our designers for developments like this? that could be a flagship. And the fourth is, what is the report, and I can't pick it up, and it might be my fault that I've missed it, is that what is the fire report from the fire brigade for a site like this, and with the questionable what the petitioners have asked for. But the one thing is, if indeed I think this is done in too much of a haste, it should be withdrawn and re-looked at.
Can I have advice on leave them on the petition at the time we've had to look at it? Bearing in mind that we accept objections up until the last.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just hover this microphone in front. Yes, so having looked at the wording of the petition, there are a number of issues raised, and these are issues that are considered, in my opinion, within the report, and has been considered by the officer. And so in terms of having time to deal with those issues, I believe they have been fully considered throughout the report and in discussions with the developer. So I think in terms of the professional approach, then there is sufficient time to deal with those issues.
Thank you. And Howard, are you able to answer some of the other questions from Councillor Benson? I didn't write them down, so I'm taking you have.
I'm not sure there are any other questions in there.
Design.
The question is, is there a time lag left? Are we pushing it ahead at speed because we have a time with the time lag with the developer? It must be agreed for within that time lag.
No, there is no pressure of time to bring it to committee. It has been through the consultation
And
periods.
the other one was fire.
The comments of the Devon Somerset Fire Rescue Service raised no objections to the layout and the design of the building, which is presented in full detail. They have asked to be
And there's no objections.
They've raised no objections. They've asked to be continued to be consulted as it develops. So the building regulation stage, they will also be consulted.
Well, I would like to ask at this moment in time, you might me out, but I'm going to ask this to be withdrawn if possible.
It'll have to be seconded and taken to a vote, but that will be in debate. Because we haven't... Can we let me speak, please, Councillor Hannah? We haven't got to the debate yet, and we've not heard the objections or those
I'm
things.
concerned that the report that we have in front of us from the Devon Somerset Fire Service does not tune to what the officer has said.
Yes.
No, there are no objections to the proposal. I would like to highlight a few points at this stage for consideration by the developers. Installing residential sprinklers within the event. Access and facilities for firefighting, access for emergency vehicles, including turning facilities. And none of that. Are we assured that all those criteria have been met?
But they have looked at the full details. There's a full planning application showing the layout of the site, the layout of the parking, and all the layouts of the building, and they have raised no objections. They have asked to continue to be consulted as the scheme evolves, so the building regulation stage, for example, they would also be consulted again. But they have raised no objections to the full details of the planning application.
Within your report, there raised issues, and what I'm trying to say, have those issues been addressed?
They have seen the layout of the site and raised no objections. There is a turning head for large vehicles in the site, and they have raised no objections to the layout of the site, which is provided in full detail.
Yes, Councillor Moore.
So I think the discussion is about two different points. So Councillor Mitchell was asked whether...
Have you got your mic on? Sorry, just so that people can hear. So I think the discussion has been discussing two different points. So noting the comments about layout, Councillor Mitchell has highlighted the comments on page 21 with relation to access, facilities for firefighting and the sprinklers. So have those specific things in their response included in this report been addressed. So notwithstanding the comments on layout which have been heard and well made. Thank you. Not being a trained planner, which I want to make really careful. The really important line is there are no objections. Then the conversation that continues about the sprinkler, and that's an added on. We think we should still talk about that, but the very clear line at the beginning of that sentence is we have no objections. So that's what we're going with. I think the conversation should continue with the developer, but that's not, that's not, they've not objected, it's not a reason for us to refuse, it would be a weak reason to refuse the application.
So, sorry, I'm not looking for reasons to...
No, I think...
I'm looking for a response to the specific point that the councillor has made, and so it's because these are actually quite important issues, notwithstanding that we do understand the first sentence.
I think that Howard did respond to that. He said it was an ongoing conversation and they've asked to be consulted as that goes forward. So he did answer that at the beginning.
And, Chairman, if I may, just to give members comfort, building regulations will deal with a building of this size and it will require certain provision. So that's a different regime. We as planners won't cover all of the requirements, but building regulations will impose them.
Okay.
Can I have a point of clarification?
Can I let the other people speak a minute? Because you lot have all had to say, but there are other people who put their hands up who haven't had a go. Can we just let everyone have a start and then we'll have your clarification or your question after Councillor Sutton, who has sat very patiently for all of you. Okay?
Chair, actually, I was just raising the point earlier on about whether we got into debate or not, because I thought we were still on question of clarification. Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Hammond.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, but my point of clarification is, you say that to us, right, that these things will get ironed out in the planning process, and it's not your fault, but I can tell you now in Exeter, in Lavender Road, in Clover Avenue, the houses were built with no fire hydrants and no access to any water when we had a fire there. So my issue is, I think, where legally do we stand? It says, and I'm a member of the Deferred Fire and Somerset Rescue Authority. I'll put that one in, Chair. What is the difference between having no objections to this proposal overall, I would guess, but then very specifically about the sprinklers, and particularly the turning head? And I think it is, I think we need more of an assurance on that one, because it's you could look at that both ways and think.
Councillor, I think the point is, as you highlight, that things sometimes look one way in planning and might change. So they are no objections to what they're seeing on paper here that's being considered by the committee, and they want to be kept consulted so that it stays that way, is how I interpret it. They want to know that the turning head is provided as they see on the plans. So they don't want to change the curriculum.
Councillor Halliford, you sat with me on planning at Devon County. Can you remember every time something smelly came in? And they'd go, oh, it's going to smell awful, and they go, that's not for us to decide because there's an environmental regulation that will cover that. I think, if I'm right, what I've just been told by Barry is that building regs pick those things up and they won't get approval to have their building opened if it hasn't picked all those things up. That's my understanding. I think we both know really where we're going with this, and I would really like to move to the point in a minute where we can actually have a debate. So if anyone else got any questions, because I think it's going to be a fun debate, if nothing else. So are there any more actual questions that need to be asked? No. In which case, Councillor Sparling will be pleased to hear. We're moving into hearing representations and understanding of order number 44. Councillor Sparling is going to come over here and speak first. There is no time limit, but don't feel the urge to test the theory.
I thought I asked this call to be withdrawn.
And I said that we could get to that point in debate, but I think we should hear everybody's point of view before we get to the debate. Okay? Sorry, I'm being a bit primary school teacher today, but we're going to go through the process until we get to the right bit, okay?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Committee. I would like to begin by noting that local residents have been largely understanding and open-minded about the redevelopment of this brownfield site, and do hope that it will be successful. However, when planning permission was granted back in 2018, they were sadly let down and ignored regarding an everyday issue relating to the siting of the access point for both the care home and the assisted living sites on Weirfield Road. There are a variety of known issues surrounding the Weirfield Road access, and due to this poor choice of location, there will likely be further unseen issues in the future, which will create conflict with the existing community from the start. There is a simple solution to everything I am about to explain: to use Topsham Road as the access to both sites as per the original arrayed site. I am aware that the revised application relates to the number of residences. However, the concerns remain relevant today and will have a large impact on the city for a long time to come. It is especially important to note the large shifts in our ways of living and moving around the city, witnessed especially since the start of the pandemic, such as an increase in online shopping, which brings a lot of deliveries. Weirfield Road runs alongside the development and is the proposed site for the main vehicular access point for both this site and the care home. It is a narrow cul-de-sac road with resident parking on both sides, predominantly single carriageway without passing bays, plus a narrow pavement on one side only. The road is a key active travel route, and due to its semi-pedestrianised nature, is very popular with families, cyclists, joggers, dog walkers, locals, visitors to the quay, as well as the local resident felines. Let's not forget them. I have regularly witnessed people using the roadway itself, as with little traffic, people feel safe to do so. By unnecessarily increasing traffic on Weirfield Road, this will be going directly against the aims of the council by reducing the space available for active travel. The transport strategy for Exeter has a goal of making 50% of all journeys originating and ending in the city by foot or cycling, and we desperately need more safe space, not less. Whilst this application is for the age-restricted homes only, without change, the care home would be locked into the same access point on Weirfield Road, and so the needs and impact of the care home must also be considered. The car park will offer 28 spaces for the age-restricted homes, plus a further 27 spaces for the care home. This potentially brings 55 additional vehicles into regular use on Weirfield Road, before the consideration of any other types of vehicles, such as delivery vans and lorries, emergency vehicles, taxis for the care home, and so on. The increased traffic would very quickly cause blockages on this single carriageway as vehicles try to join busy Topsham Road, potentially also causing traffic to build up on Topsham Road, all the while increasing air pollution from vehicles idling while stuck. This proposed access point would also be used by mobility scooters, as from the site plans it appears there is no access to the shopper's entrance on Topsham Road from the buggy store. The pavement has now been improved with 2 build-out sections to allow a safer crossing for people accessing the pavement on the other side of the road. However, the pavement is not of sufficient width to allow buggies to travel up and down, with space to pass each other, and especially not on bin collection days, which reduces the pavement width by half. This will force them to use the road to travel to and from the site and put them in direct conflict with vehicles, which is a serious safety concern. Another access suitability issue is that there are mains power cables running along Weirfield Road. In the past 3 years, the road has been excavated twice for up to 3 weeks each time. What consideration has been given to waste collection or emergency vehicle access to the site and care home should this happen? The siting of this proposed access point was in fact the driveway to the headmaster's residence, a driveway that gave no access to the further site and allowed space for 1 or 2 cars. This is not comparable to a car park for approximately 55 vehicles. Access to the full arrayed site was from Topsham Road, which should set the precedent for access to this new site. The developer's communications team helpfully provided the board councillors with a pre-committee briefing document. This document admitted that the most common concern was regarding the site, vehicular access and car parking. It claims to have relieved these concerns by adding a drop-off point on Topsham Road. However, this does not address the vehicular access point and in fact simply reinstates the drop-off point originally included within the existing permission. No improvement has been made from the original plan, and whilst a new proposal may slightly reduce the vehicular movements by the development's change in nature, it does not mitigate the issues with using a quiet cul-de-sac for access. Finally, you'll be glad to hear, there is also a precedent for later refusal of access routes onto Weirfield Road following the granting of planning permission for new residential developments. An access point was included at the end of Wearside Place when it was built. However, due to the strength of feeling from residents at the time, a gate was installed, which is now kept locked at all times. At this point, I would like to refer to the petition that will be presented by Mrs. Powell on behalf of the local community, who have my full support. Please let it be noted that the petition was not widely publicised. In fact, they turned down media publicity in order to keep it truly local, which with 952 verified signatures shows the strength of feeling of the local community. It should also be noted that out of the 118 objections to this application, 116 of those referenced this access on Weirfield Road. Instead of a balanced approach, the current plans lay the impact unfairly on local residents, maximising the development's profits at the expense of local community well-being. With all of these issues facing the access proposal, there is a simple alternative: to create access to both sites via Topsham Road, eliminating all of these issues put before you. I therefore respectfully ask the committee to move for a deferral in order for the developer to reconsider the access point and redesign this with the local community and future of Exeter's residents in mind. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Councillor Smalling, I was just writing things. Would you mind if there are any questions for you? Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Councillor Smalling? Councillor Minton?
One question. What has been the response by the developer to the concerns raised so far by residents through the petition and you as ward councillors?
So the response has been in the pre-briefing document that they feel they have addressed those concerns with the drop-off point on the top of Topsham Road.
Thank you.
That all? Okie dokie. Thank you very much, Councillor Sparling. Next, I'm going to call to speak, person I'm going to is Helen Powell, who's objecting on behalf of the local residents, I believe. You only get 3 minutes, I'm afraid, though, but we'll give you a shout just before you get time. And if you press the sort of shouty mouse at the bottom of the speaker, that should switch it on.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me speak today. My question is, we urge the committee to consider why should traffic which is ending up on Topsham Road be sent via a narrow cul-de-sac when it could go straight to Topsham Road from the site? Local residents are very much in favour of the retirement living complex, and we think it will benefit our community, so we welcome the planning proposal but with a modification. I own a house on Weirfield Road which is 120 years old and is in one of Exeter's oldest streets. It's a steep, narrow, single-lane cul-de-sac, very popular with cyclists, walkers, families and joggers, and is the main pedestrian access to and from the Exeter Quay and its riverside paths. It shares its entry to and from Topsham Road at the top with our church and its active community, St Leonard's Avenue running parallel and Bernardo Road opposite. There's a thin pavement on one side, parking on both, with no passing bays and a medieval wall running along the boundary to the site. The access into and out of Weirfield Road past 4 years ago has always been seen by residents as ill-advised, as the Deaf Academy had several access points for traffic on Topsham Road, which worked really well for decades. Limited visibility at the top of Weirfield Road makes it a challenging junction to negotiate and queue at, especially with the new highway code rules, when pedestrians, cars and bikes are squeezed into a small restricted space. Wheelchairs and motorised buggies are not practical on this road due to its gradient, and it's steeper in reality than you think, and a wide-angle lens is misleading as the road is not flat. The access point halfway down Weirfield Road was never a road, but a small driveway to the old schoolhouse where the headmaster lived. Churchill consulted 109 households in late December 2021, and the 118 objections raised by the 16th of January opposed the access road, suggesting Topsham Road instead. I launched an e-petition myself on the Exeter Council website, and it closed recently with 952 local signatures objecting only to the position of the access road. I suggest on the plan which I emailed you that you can see a new road junction using the existing original signal crossing on Topsham Road, taking traffic safely in and out of both the retirement living and the care home, with a much more prominent entrance point with very good security and surveillance off the main road for this high-end development. Western Power owns a mains power line running down below this road and under the river. Weirfield Road has been closed and dug up for utility repairs twice in the last 3 years. If this was to happen again, the new residents would be totally without vehicle access. This road is not a designated blue light road for emergency services. An emergency ambulance needs to reach a patient very fast. The Care Quality Commission states that steep roads are intimidating for local people.
I'm very harsh on this because then I will be vindictive and that way everyone's fair. So I'm sorry that you didn't quite get the time to speak on. Are you happy to answer questions if anybody's happy for you? Does anyone have any questions for Mrs. Powell? Oh, Councillor Moore.
I'm going to be original and ask Councillor Mitchell's question. How have the developers responded to your concerns in the petition?
I have eventually had a response from Churchill's. It did take quite some time to get that, but I guess eventually. And they seemed to suggest that they could allay our fears by the fact that there would be less traffic movements than I thought. But we haven't really had our fears allayed at all. I think it would be fair to say that we don't feel that our road is suitable for an access road, simply because of its nature. Yes. Thank you.
Councillor Branson.
What were the issues that you raised with them that you felt that they didn't respond in any way?
I think the only issue I raised with them that I didn't get a direct response from was why Topsham Road itself, which had been the Deaf Academy access point, wasn't suitable, and what was wrong with that, because I can remember at the time the deaf school was there, because I've lived in my house for 18 years, that there were 3 access points because the children were deaf and some of the parents were hard of hearing, so they had to bring the children in very safely. And I felt those 3 areas worked really well, but I haven't had any reason as to why those wouldn't work now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mack, for your time. Next, I call forward Stuart Goodwill, who will be speaking in favour of the application. You also have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair, Councillors and members of the public. My name is Stuart Goodwill and I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant Church of Retirement Living. The wider scheme for the previous development was approved in June 2018, which approved an assisted living scheme on our parcel of the site and approved the highways access from Weirfield Road. Our scheme before you today seeks to replace the assisted living scheme with an independent retirement living scheme. The proposal seeks to maintain all highway arrangements as previously consented, with the Weirfield access already being informed in part as part of the previous consent. The drop-off zone to the front from Topsham Road is also proposed for deliveries, servicing and taxi drop-off. The scheme will result in a reduced level of vehicle movement from that previously approved. Only a lodge manager is employed on this scheme compared to significant care, kitchen and laundry staff required with the assisted living scheme. Highways have confirmed they have no objection to this scheme and acknowledge it will reduce vehicle movement. The scheme before you has reduced the height and mass to that previously approved, which will provide an improvement to Weirfield Road residents. The design reflecting the previous design approach and comprehensive approach to the wider site. In summary, the proposal will utilise the existing approved access arrangements, reduce vehicle movements from previously approved schemes, provide shops entrance directly onto Topsham Road, provide 4 residence parking spaces for Weirfield Road, all construction traffic from Topsham Road, and reduce the height and mass of the building. In terms of contributions, the scheme will provide a SIL contribution to the council of circa £860,000, whereas the previous scheme provided no SIL payment, and we are committed to continued discussions on affordable housing as per the officer recommendation. The scheme will also deliver a string of social and economic benefits. The Council's Strategic Housing Market Assessment has identified that the 75 plus population in Exeter is forecast to increase by 47% by 2033. We specialise in delivering schemes on brownfield sites within half a mile of facilities. The average age of our residents when they move in is 79, and most moves are following a life-changing event like a loss of a partner or downsizing. Most purchasers do not bring a car with them, but those that do often give it up after 6 to 12 months due to the newfound freedom of friendship groups, safety and being within walking distance of facilities. Retirement living schemes not only combat loneliness but also deliver other benefits. There is clear evidence that demonstrates these schemes not only provide health benefits and NHS savings, there is also a significant boost to a town centre's economic vitality, with the residents being basket shoppers directly benefiting the shops at Magdalen Road as well as Exeter City itself. The proposal is an improvement for existing residents of Wearfield Road over what has been previously approved on site and will be delivered tomorrow. As such, I would respectfully request that you support your officers on the recommendation before you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Would you be happy to receive questions?
Absolutely.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. You're aware from the discussions obviously this evening that one key issue as far as residents are concerned and many members are concerned with. To what extent is it possible for you to comply with wishes of the local community?
So I think the key difficulty is, as you've probably heard, I think the officers are trying to request, we comprise a small parcel of this site. The care home to the south is already approved and being built as per the approval with an access on Wearfield Road. The open space where we're coming through for construction access is actually open space associated with the wider residential development. So we have no control over any of that land. The only parcel we do is the parcel you see before you, which is accessed off Wearfield Road. So we can't influence the care home, we can't influence the open space, we don't control that. The only bit we control is a bit in front of us, which has the approved access off Wearfield Road. Obviously what we're trying to do is make sure we've introduced the shopper's entrance, introduced the drop-off bay, and that was in response to the public consultation, because we didn't have that initially, because our vehicle movements are less than that was approved, but it was made clear through various correspondence that that was an important factor, so we brought that back in, and then introduced the shopper's entrance out onto Option Road. So the access through the open space, we can't deliver that, we have no ability to deliver that. And likewise, changing the care home access, we have no ability to deliver that. So you have a very fixed framework, hence our access being off Wearfield Road with a better vehicle movements.
Thank you very much for your time. If you can switch. Oh,
Sorry.
You say you're approved road. On the approved road on Tottenham Road that did exist, why didn't you keep it?
We didn't get consent for the original consent. So the original consent, I think, was delivered, I think it was Acorn who delivered the wider site, and we secured this portion of the site off them. So we weren't involved in the initial discussions regarding site access. So we bought this site with the access of Wearfield Road.
thank you. And Councillor Moore? Thank you very much. I've got a couple of questions on other issues. First of all, I just want to register my discontent about the number of trees that have been cut down on the boundary. What's done is done, but then some very historic trees that are being cut down. But notwithstanding, but I just wanted to say that was why you're here. But that, I just wanted to know in terms of your viability assessment, what level of affordable housing is that currently proposing that you're looking to negotiate down to? And my second question is, just in terms of your waste arrangements, are you planning cut and fill so that you deal with your waste on site rather than taking them to landfill elsewhere?
Okay, so I'll just try to take those in turn. So just quickly point on the trees. Obviously, we weren't involved in the tree removal at that time, so but I acknowledge that there was some trees along that boundary. In terms of the affordable housing scheme, as I alluded to in my deputation, the previous scheme had no sales contribution, so this scheme is already delivering an extra £860,000 towards funding. Our position on the affordable housing is that we're saying that actually no affordable housing contribution will be provided, But that's the very early stage of a viability discussion. Unfortunately, and hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn, that the council's consultant has been unwell recently, and unfortunately we haven't had the level of discussion we would normally have, and we've obviously had that difficult position where we have the recommendation for you, but we're very much committed to continuing those discussions. In terms of cut and fill, it's always our intention not to remove waste from the site. That's hence why you see the dropping in the level of the building. The idea is to keep it to a zero waste off-site using a cut and fill strategy.
Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned the shopper's entrance. Could you confirm whether mobility scooters will be able to access that route?
So mobility scooters they'll have to use the lift because of the split levels. They will have to use the lift. The lifts we put in are suitable for mobility scooters to get around. So yes, they will be able to get out that way via a mobility scooter using the lift scenario if they're on a different floor.
Thank you. I think that's everybody.
Thank you very much
for your time. Now I'm going to open the debate, Councillor Henderson. Going to open the debate. Would you like to say anything?
I'm asking that I'm not against what is on the for or against what is in what I am kicking at is that the haste that this was done in 3 days by officers with staff on the north, could we really discuss, or could you with the officers and other councillors feel safe, I'm using the first word safe, that we have done everything we can that is asked of us as councillors to be fair and proper. And to be fair and proper, if something is uncomfortable and we are not, and it doesn't seem right, I am of the view that 3 days is not enough to look at this in the proper manner of what the officers, what the residents are asking. The design, that's for further debate. The design was agreed before, so I'm not including in this. What my concern is the fact that if there is problems, we must be seen as a council to be doing things in a proper manner and to explore everything and to assure the residents that they see us as representing them, regardless if we like it or we dislike it. That is my argument for asking it to be withdrawn, Madam Chair.
Was it for withdrawal? I thought earlier it was for deferral. Yes, you mean I just want clarity on what you're proposing. So it's not. I'm not trying to be difficult. I just want clarity. And Councillor Hannaford, you seconded that earlier, so you're happy to second again?
Yes, Chair, and I think I am happy to second for a deferral. I mean, clearly we've had a lot of issues around the access, and I hear what the developers have said today about they bought it with the access where it is. I still think there is a feeling at a future debate, perhaps, that strong consideration should not be given to moving this sort of parking access point up to the northeast corner, which I think would at least relieve some of the pressure in the road itself. An almost sort of rejigging of the site almost, because the developer said what he didn't have control over, but what he does really have control over is how he configures the site that they own and they develop. And I think in the interest of being a good neighbour, I think they should take a strong steer, I think, from this very large petition and the local members and the views here. But I think the compelling reason why we should defer actually does come from what the developer has now said, that the fact around the affordable housing, the fact that one of our members of staff has not been engaged. I'm not sure that we've gone.
It's a consultant that we use, and they've been unwell, and our second consultant, which is Plymouth council is also unable to do the work.
Well, so there you are. So I don't see we can go forward with having those gaps in the process and the system. And there is a concern, and what that would have been one of my concerns, is around the off-site deferred affordable housing section. I mean, again, I can only speak from my experience. I've had some of these big retirement blocks along Carrick Street. Somehow we've managed to put in a mixture of affordable housing, like Isabel Court, Carousel Court. There's affordable housing in there mixed in with you know, it might be a different block, but it's mixed in. They go to the same communal rooms, and we're in favour, I thought, of mixed communities with mixed incomes. And I get very nervous, again, from my experience with other roles I've had, about off-site and commuting some, because then the problem is, how do you make those stack up to provide other affordable units? So I get from the developer here, they're citing now the cost of living crisis and the cost of materials as a reason why it's not viable, but unfortunately, Chair, as you know, and in my considered opinion, the biggest crisis facing Exeter is a lack of affordable and social housing, and I'm very reluctant as well to go down the route of losing that on this site. So I think, on balance, I definitely support the deferral. I think the developer needs to have a time for reflection, and we need to get ourselves organised in a better way, particularly on the issue about affordable housing, the viability, and if we do go for off-site provision, really firm up how that would work and how that would be achieved. Thank you, Chair.
Right, so before we move forward this, and I have no strong opinion either way on it, but I'm going to let Howard speak in a minute, but we need to be clear why we're deferring and whether there's actually any likelihood that the outcome will change anything. Because if you don't like the application and the deferral is unlikely to change anything, you should refuse it and we take that to appeal. If you do like the application and you should be voting in favour of it, then you should be, but there's a lot of context to that, and I think we had that explained to us at the beginning. We're losing sight of that a little, so I'm going to let Howard speak for a bit, so that we fully understand the decisions we're making. I don't personally have an opinion either side at the moment, but I think we need the context again. And then I will come to you, Michael, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think you're right, there's two separate points there being raised. One is about access and the other is about affordable housing. In terms of the access, the applicant has put in his application, and you know it is very well to determine that application that's put to us. It may be something, a question to ask the applicant, whether they would reconsider the access point or whether they want it determined on the basis of the access point submitted with the application. The second point was with affordable housing, and you're absolutely right. Our policy is to pepper pot and to mix in affordable housing with with the market housing, with housing developments. That's very simple. When you come to flatted blocks, it gets more complicated. On a larger site with more blocks, as the wider E-rate site, there are separate blocks of affordable housing and market housing. So the registered social landlord has a whole block and can manage that whole block, and there is shared ownership in the rented in those blocks. On this site, it is a very tight site. There is one block. There isn't that opportunity to construct sensibly two separate blocks. There's also the history of a previous scheme with a block of that size. So that is why in this instance, we think there is a special circumstance where we would accept off-site provision. There is then a hierarchy of how we would want that achieved. First of all, either the developer is actually building another site in parallel and they deliver the affordable housing that way, or they actually purchase to appropriate dwellings to meet the affordable housing requirements they purchase in the market. Actually, E-Rate next door has some blocks of flats and some smaller houses that might be very suitable for that purpose. Go down that route. And then it is only taking a commuted sum is the last resort. So, that is the way we go about the affordable housing hierarchy.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. I was just looking at the dates of the last decision in regard to the site. It was prior to me being a member of the authority or the planning committee, so I speak with a clear conscience on this one. It does concern me that we've got an extant planning permission regarding this site. We've now got a further application in regard to this site, which makes minor alterations to the site number, heights, etc. But on the key issue that the local residents and many of us are concerned about, we're told in fact we can do nothing about it because the permission was there. It does worry me as a planning principle that where you've made a poor decision in the past you're lumbered with that poor decision, and when in hindsight you come on later and say, actually that wasn't right, there's nothing we can do about it. I'm very concerned in a planning principle you can't correct not errors.
Wrongly suggest lobbying the government, if you'd like that change.
But it is a worrying factor that not all things are perfect all times, and sometimes things do need correcting, and this is one of the areas of work. And you would hope that a reasonable developer or a reasonable group of developers on this site will be willing to meet with the authority and with local residents and consider their concerns and reservations, because these are effectively public concerns for people's welfare. It's not nothing to do with the residents of Welfare Road. In effect, it's about the people on that site and their safety that I'm concerned about. I'm very concerned about the local residents, but I think it's only to use that narrow road and to expect emergency vehicles to go down there, especially where you've got a care facility that was mainly for the elderly and for people who might have a greater need for those services than others, is putting lives at risk. And I think somehow we've got to clearly look at sites where we've got a group of developers working and try to get some agreement on a master plan for access, etc., before we start off. Because as I said, it seems to me that we're prisoners of a decision earlier made. Wherever we feel now, we are trapped.
Trying to switch with your microphone. No. I have been on this committee long enough to remember the previous application, and I can remember the strong arguments made by Deferred County Council as Highways Authority as to why it wasn't acceptable access. So that's where we are. We didn't have grounds to refuse it on highways grounds at that time. You've been on the committee long enough to know that argument. So that's how we looked at where we are, and whether we like it or not, that access exists. Councillor Moore.
I just wanted to follow up from Councillor Mitchell's point that the developer has heard that there is community support for this development in principle, and I would hope that they would be willing to be able to go and renegotiate these important issues. And in terms of a deferral, the reason I want to add road safety to this, as well as the access, because there's some really important issues about the junction and along the road itself that have been mentioned, and so that would be another issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. So I'm going to put this in the vote in just a second, but what we need to bear in mind is all those things that you've just raised about highways and road safety, Devon County have said are fine. So as a reason for objection, they would be weaker to appeal. Do you know, that doesn't mean I agree with them. There have been plenty of applications where you've all heard me have my opinions on highway safety and Devon County Council, so I'm not changing that. I think you need to be aware of that. So we can go back and talk to them, but when the application comes to us again, I don't know where we'll stand if things haven't changed, okay? So I'm now putting the application to you for a deferral. All those in favour, raise your hand.
6 in favour, Chair.
All those against?
3 against. 4 against, sorry.
Yeah. On which grounds it's been deferred for the reasons you heard earlier. Sorry, Barry, just come on to say.
So just to be clear then, Chair, so it's on the viability issue plus the highway issue.
Yes. To see if we can reach agreement, because I think we all understand where we stand with the previous application now. Give everybody 5 minutes to take a breath, get a drink of water, use the toilet. Thank you everyone who came on behalf of that application for your time and your patience with us. Okay, thank you. Welcome back, everyone. We will now move on to item number 6, which is the planning application number 21/0835/47 Homeville Road, Exeter. And I'd like to welcome Emily to the planning committee for her first presentation.
Okay, so planning consent is sought for the redevelopment of the site for residential use. The development includes the conversion of the locally listed main school building and the chapel, as well as the demolition of redundant classrooms, outbuildings, and the provision of 2 residential dwellings on the site. In total, it will create 25 new residential units, and this is the former Bramdean School site. So it's the former Branding School. It's located on the west side of Hamefield Road in a predominantly residential area. To the east of the site is the playing field that was formerly part of the school but does not form part of the application site. The site is located in the Hereditary Conservation Area, and 250 metres to the south-east of the site is the Hereditary District Centre, and 500 metres to the east of the site is Hereditary Pleasure Ground Park. The aerial view shows the school site to the centre of the image, and that's just here. To the east of the site you can see the playing field, and to the west of the site a student housing development. So this image shows a view from Hamefield Road. So we've got the existing main access in the centre, which will be retained, and also the existing high boundary wall, which is proposed to be lowered with railings put on top. This image shows the pedestrian access to the site from Hamefield Road, which is proposed to be retained. And you can also see on the image the older brick where the wall used to be much lower. Got a photo from within the site. We've got the chapel building, which was referred to as the music house on the proposed plans, and to the centre of the image is the locally listed main school building. Towards the centre, which connects the two buildings, leads into the existing sports hall, which is proposed to be demolished. And so some further images from within the site, again showing the chapel building and the locally listed main building. So the proposal is for the main school building to be retained and converted into 14 apartments with a mixture of 4 one-bed and 10 two-bed apartments. The chapel building, referred to as the music house on the proposed plans, will also be retained and converted into 9 apartments over 3 floors, all 2-bedroom. The remaining buildings on the site, which include the gym, homewood block and auxiliary single storage buildings around the chapel, are proposed to be demolished, and 2 two-storey detached properties are proposed to be constructed. A 2-storey dwelling proposed to the south-east corner with off-street parking, its own access, and a further detached 2-storey building towards the north-west boundary. There'll be 2 communal areas on the site, one forward of the chapel building and a larger one behind the main school. The boundary wall fronting Hamefield Road will be altered to a low wall with railings above, and the existing main vehicle entrance to the site will be retained. There's 27 car parking spaces proposed on site with access to 7 electric vehicle charging points. Secure covered cycle parking is provided for all dwellings, and there will also be it's 2 or 3. I'm just checking notes. There'll be 2 charging points for electric vehicles, electric bikes and scooters within one of the storage sites. The proposed site plan. So the 2 buildings that are being retained on site are the main school building here and the chapel building here. The remainder of the existing buildings, which are around here at the moment and there's further down here, are all proposed to be demolished. In the original scheme for the site, in this northwest corner, it was proposed to have 2 semi-detached dwellings with private gardens at the front. Through negotiations, through the second consultation, this has been reduced to 1 detached dwelling with a private garden to the rear and introducing this large communal amenity space. The second detached dwelling is down here, so the bottom at the left corner the screen. It's got its own vehicle access point here and off-road parking, private garden to the rear. The main access to the site, as shown on photographs, is here, being retained, taking you into the main car parking area, and this is the existing pedestrian access to that's also going to be retained. So as I said previously, there's 27 car parking spaces across the site. There's each of these small red squares are each of the electric vehicle charging points, and it's within this shelter here that there's the electric charging point for bikes or for scooters. So just talking through the main school building, there's not very many alterations proposed to the exterior of this building. It's largely focused on the removal of the exterior staircase on the rear of the building, and they're also proposing sort of balconies from the top floor flats. This one's going to be converted into 14 apartments across the 4 floors, 4 one-beds and 10 two-beds. The plans for the floors are shown here, and the blue and the orange is just shown to highlight the different flat areas. Each of the lower ground floors will have access to private garden spaces at the rear and a smaller private courtyard at the back. And the chapel building, as proposed plans referred to as the music house, also to be retained, and the alterations focused here are the removal of some of the attachments to the other buildings, and also some changes to the windows arrangements. So across the 3 floors here, we've got the ground floor plan on the left-hand side and the second and third floor to the right at the same arrangement. 3 flats on each floor, or 2-bed, and each of the ground floor flats again will have access to private garden space. So this is the Muse House, which is located to the northeast corner of the site, as indicated the red circle in the corner image. This one was, as I said, originally proposed as a pair of semi-detached dwellings, and it's now proposed to be a 2-storey rendered dwelling, pitched roof and a small dormer to the front elevations and solar panels on the rear roof slope. Internally, you can see it's a 4-bedroom house spread across the 2 floors and the converted roof space. You can see the solar panels on the image there. And finally, the detached building to the southeast corner of the site, again indicated by the red circle on the plan in the corner, is also was originally proposed to be flat roofed, but they've undergone a range of changes in the design here for a rendered pitched roof property with 2 small dormers, and again solar panels on the rear roof slope. And as with the previous one, this is a 4-bedroomed dwelling, and again utilising space in the roof for the 2 of the bedrooms. So the street scene elevation will show the 2 buildings that are retained, the additional dwelling that's going in the southeast corner and its own access, and the existing lane access and the pedestrian access there. And you can also see how the wall itself is going to be lowered. So we received a total of 19 objections across 2 consultation periods. The key areas of concern were highways, trees and ecology, heritage impact and future-proofing of the site. In terms of highways, the concerns raised were that the further residential will put additional pressure on roads, increase congestion, conflict between cars, pedestrians, cycling, and if parking is insufficient, will further exacerbate parking issues in the local area. We consider the site to be a sustainable location within walking and cycling distance of employment hubs, the city centre and the Hereditary District Centre. Whilst the residents feel the number is inadequate, the Highways Authority has not objected to the proposed parking level, access arrangement and the parking layout, and they do not consider that there will be a significant increase in trip generation. I've also received confirmation from Devon County Council that resident parking permits will not be issued to the new development, and they've requested an informative to this effect to make it clear to the people purchasing the properties. In terms of trees ecology, it was considered that the loss of trees were not acceptable, particularly those along the southern boundary. There was a lack of green features and a large amount of hard standing, and a question as to whether there would be provision for batteries and switch boxes. The Council's tree officers have been consulted as part of this application and stated that although the loss of trees is regrettable, it's understandable given the position of the trees and the poor spatial relationship to the adjacent walls or surrounding structures, both on and off the site. They proposed that a robust planting scheme should be conditioned as part of any approval provision for B bricks, bird and bat boxes throughout the site. We've also, through the negotiations, increased the amount of green spaces through the introduction of the communal amenity spaces on the site. Heritage concerns with the buildings of historical context and should be returned. The proposal retains the locally listed building and ensures its continued use. The development is considered to contribute positively to the hereditary conservation area with a sympathetic development, opening up the site and introducing more soft landscaping. There are also concerns concerning future-proofing and green energy, with an objector raising questions whether there was scope for rainwater capture and charging facilities for bikes, motorbikes, cars, and inclusion of PV array. So both the chapel building and the 2 new dwellings will have solar panels on the roof. There's 7 electric car vehicle charging points throughout the site, and there will also be 2 electric bike charging points and also available for scooters on the site. And the 2 proposed new builds will be expected to demonstrate a 90% reduction in CO2 emissions in relation to the required level of building regulations. In summary, it's considered that the proposed development, including the diversion of the 2 buildings, represents a development sympathetic to the heritage assets, and the proposed development will provide good levels of internal and external amenity space, and the level of parking is considered acceptable by the local planning officer and the local highways officer. I just run through the updates on the additional information sheets. We have an update regarding the affordable housing contribution. So we've given careful consideration in consultation with council as to the level of affordable housing recommended to be sought as part of the Section 106 agreement. Originally we were seeking a 35% contribution. However, the applicant has raised the issue of the vacant building credits, which is an incentive for brownfield development sites containing vacant buildings. The site at Henfield Road contains a number of vacant buildings, and as a result of the school closure, including the main school building, chapel building will be retained, and the rest of the buildings demolished. Where vacant buildings put back into its lawful use or is demolished and replaced by a new building, a developer should be offered financial credit equivalent to the gross floor space of the relevant vacant buildings. And when the local planning authority calculates any affordable housing contribution which will be sought. In terms of our policy for affordable housing, it's policy CP7, it's currently out of date in relation to paragraph 64 of the National Planning Policy Framework in terms of the vacant building credit. However, we do recognise there's a significant need for affordable housing within the city, and therefore we've adjusted our recommendation to approve the application with an amendment that if the application is approved, delegated authority is granted to the service lead to negotiate an affordable housing contribution to be secured through Section 106 agreement. And the other point is regarding the confirmation from Devon County Highways that the new residential units would not be eligible for on-street parking permits. So this is our recommendation for approval, subject to the completion of a Section 106 agreement, including contributions for the NHS healthcare for £27,647. We've had a request from Parks and Green Spaces, a contribution of £12,000, habitats mitigation of £859 per residential unit created, and the affordable housing contribution. If we fail to secure the Section 106 agreement, this will be the recommendation for the approval, the refusal in the event of that. And that's all from me.
Thank you, Emily. So I've got Councillor Hannaford and Councillor Mitchell ready to ask questions, and Councillor Moore and Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Chair. Particularly in regard to page 60 and the reference you had about the vacant building credits, and through the report, if you look at the council's policy and the application itself, and then what the possible outcomes could be, it's just to get your view on that, and clarity. I think that at various points in the report you're talking about the age dwellings that should be on site, and then obviously going through the vacant building credit where apparently, you know, we're looking at an off-site contribution, and it's just and what the developer here is arguing that no affordable housing should be sought in this instance. It seems to be an application with some creative tensions in it, shall I say, and you know, so are we saying at the moment no on-site affordable housing and only off-site contributions? And the reason why I'm asking that again is from my own experience when the Crossmead Centre site was redeveloped, which is now Eaton Drive, etc. Again, we had another substantial building, the Crossmead Centre, that was, you know, was falling down by then. But anyway, it seems the same scenario, but we still had on-site affordable and market mix. So again, you know, I mean, forgive me if I'm not up on my recent legislation, but again, we seem to be able to do it before. Why can't we do it now? And again, Chair, concerns over, you know, I can see now perhaps a whole flood of applications where affordable housing contributions are off-site because of the cost of labour materials and cost of living crisis, which then in turn actually means we're not meeting a housing crisis.
I would suggest that this is an ongoing debate and that the council probably doesn't want to have it in committee, that it's something we'd like to keep a bit of it to ourselves rather than in front of the developers. So as such, I'm going to let Emily answer that, but as carefully as she possibly can.
Or Barry.
Yeah, I'll answer this one. I think the note, the additional note that we provided, sort of covers it as far as we want to go. To be honest with you, hence it's if the application is approved, that it would be delegated to myself to negotiate affordable housing contribution in some form.
I would also probably amend if everybody was favourable, but maybe as Chair of Planning, I signed that decision off as well, so that we feel that there is council involvement in that. And I don't know, we'll do that in debate, but I think maybe that's something that people may feel more comfortable that there's a council impact. Is that all of your questions, Councillor Hampton? Then I'd like to move to Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you, Chair. That's answered one of my questions in relation. I was concerned that we've delegated an authority. I think one of the officers having a delegated authority, but this is quite an important issue in regard to this site and other sites, was what is member involvement quite clearly. So the Chair, you are involved in the decision-making process. As Section 106 agreements are so central to a lot of our planning at the moment, where you do not get agreement, where there's a disagreement, clearly we've got the ultimate power saying, go away, sort of thing. No, thank you. But is there a mediation service or some sort of agreements, other service that can be used to arrive at a determination, or is it simply just left to us as an authority to hammer it out with the developer?
I don't know.
It's the second one really. It's down to us. We're the decision-making authority, and if we don't get to Section 106 agreement with the obligations that we're happy with, then as you say, we can then refuse that application. So it's down to us to deal with it.
So it strengthens our position in effect.
Councillor Moore, I have you just the broadcast.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions. In relation to the additional condition put forward by Devon County Council, I just want to clarify, has the developer provided a sustainable travel plan for the site, and if not, could they be required to do so? And will the 27 car parking sites be limited to that? And does that need to be conditioned? And the second question I have is, will waste from the construction be disposed of on the site as per the Devon waste policy? Thank you.
Certainly the answer to the first one in terms of travel plan, no, there isn't one provided with the application. And we're just checking on your second one about waste being recycled and used on site.
So in terms of the waste, there will be a condition to secure this as per the Devon County Council's waste management comments for it to be in compliance with their requirements. I'm not sure specifically whether it will be on site or not, but that condition will be added. It's been missed off at this stage.
Chair, will there be a condition written about providing a sustainable travel plan?
Thank you, Chair, and apologies, Emily. I think you may have said this, and I was trying to attract the Chair's attention, so I possibly wasn't concentrating hard enough. Am I correct in hearing that Devon County Council have indicated that residential, on-street residential parking permits won't be granted to people who live in this development?
Yeah, that's correct. They've confirmed that, and we'll have an informative so that anybody buying a property at the site will see that on the decision notice as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that's the end of the questions. Councillor Sheldon is speaking on understanding order number 44. You know all the rules, you've been here before. Don't feel you have to fill the space.
I was actually supposed to be doing a comedy gig tonight, but I will try to restrain myself. Before I start, rather than do the sort of Mr. Witty thing, could we go to the overview, the sort of aerial shot of the site? Because I'm going to refer to that when I start talking in a minute, so just easier if it's up on the screen already. So this is a proposal, the actual photograph, the aerial photograph. This is the proposal for the late unlamented Branding School. And whilst residents generally welcome development of the site, because it's getting severely scruffy at the moment, I and they have some serious reservations. The travel plan that's already been mentioned is on my list, we'll tick that straight off. It's a shame that the playing field isn't included in the proposal, since it's in the same ownership. There's community space issues all solved in one fell swoop. They've chosen not to do that, and residents are understandably concerned about what's going to be applied from that site in the future, and that's fueling their discontent. Allotments have already been mentioned, community facilities, and the longer they leave it without saying what they want to do with it, the harder they're going to find to make a proposal that people will find acceptable. I don't always fully agree with the Exeter cycle campaign on everything, but they've got some good points on this one. One cycle space for a two-bed flat isn't enough. And if that's what our planning rules say in Exeter at the moment, well, we need to go back and look at them. Because what we're saying is you can have one car per flat and one bicycle per flat. I've looked, none of the cycle storage spaces look big enough to put a tandem in, so if there's two people there, they are going to need two bicycles. I'm not being funny, but it's 27 bicycles for a site, 27 residences ain't enough. And if you're going to be doing a green travel plan, one of the things you're going to say immediately is there's an insufficient secure cycle parking on the site, which is probably why we haven't got one. I was hoping that could be here, because one of the things I was going to say is they've got sort of smaller cycle parking is 6x4 sheds. Well, if they made it 8x6, they could get 4 bikes in, not 2, and even possibly get that tandem I mentioned in. There are 3 million electric bikes in the UK currently, give or take, and under 1 million electric cars. They're proposing charging points for 7 electric cars and 2 electric bikes. The balance isn't right. On a similar provision, nearly every cycle parking space would need a charger. I don't think it's unreasonable. If you're putting power into a building to charge electric bikes and buggies, why make it so that you can only charge 2? You're putting all the infrastructure in, make it suitable to do 8. The total cost of that on a scheme this size is basically a small change at the bottom. I'm not altogether happy about losing trees, I don't think anybody is, but I want to pass this site on a regular basis, and 6 trees they want to remove practically are touching a wall. And if you stand at the end of a person's drive whose wall they're touching, someone's had to have extra concrete buttresses in the past, as well as the brick piers already there to stop the wall coming down. Effectively, in the next few years, while that wall comes down, all those trees come down. So, whilst no one welcomes it, it's understandable and reasonable. Traffic. Whilst any increase in traffic is unwelcome, I'm forced to concede that this development is going to produce a lot less traffic than Branding School. There was a flood of cars of the most biblical proportions every morning and every afternoon. In fact, the children came in 4x4. It was just, no one misses it. It's all well and good having residence parking, but if there's someone sat in their Range Rover with the engine running in residence parking, technically they're not committing an offence apart from polluting everyone, and you can't park up. Which leads me on to the no residence parking permits, which is great, but
there isn't a problem parking during the residents' parking hours in that area. What there is a problem parking in the evenings and at the weekends. So potentially, most people who have a car on that site will be gone by 10 in the morning and they won't be home until 4 in the afternoon, which means they won't need a residence permit to park on the street. So it is going to put, well, no question in my mind, additional parking pressures on the area. So, in summary, I'm not happy with this scheme at all. There are many good features about it, but there are several things that I don't find acceptable. When we thought we were going to get 35% housing on the site, when the papers came out a week ago, which we hadn't had a few weeks earlier when I looked at it, I did 3 cheers. Now we're basically going to haggle to get what we can get, which might be 35%, but realistically, if we don't have a legal basis to insist on it, I suspect not. So I'm not happy, and I'd like you to say no. Appreciate that might not happen. And finally, I'm glad pleased about that box, something positive, because there are bats, particularly on the playing field site, and I kid you not, are prevalent enough that bats are actually in the cricket pavilion. Also on that note, I'll end and ask you to say no to this application.
Thank you, Councillor Sheldon. Does anyone have any questions for Councillor Sheldon? You may leave now. Going to open the application to debate. Who would like to speak first? Councillor Sutton.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I don't think any application that we see in front of us is perfect, but a development of this site, which has been falling into disrepair ever since the school moved out, has got to be positive. It is in a residential area, it's got easy access to the very attractive Evertree shopping area. It's only a stroll to that well-known corner shop Waitrose in the other direction, and it's got easy access to buses into the city. I don't think this is a bad application. I'm quite pleased that the separate houses have been scaled back from the original application. I share the concerns around the lack of affordable housing and would definitely support any conditions, any support we can give to the officers to increase that and get as much affordable housing as possible, because it's very much needed in all parts of the city. Councillor Sheldon picked up some of the points that I have written down around 7 electric charging points for cars and 2 for electric bikes and scooters, which is patently, absolutely crazily inadequate in the current climate. It's not a bad place for cycling in hilly Exeter, pretty much up the big hill, so you can come down into town, and if you've got an electric bike, it's not so bad coming back up again. So I think the developers need to be asked, stroke encouraged, stroke forced to put in better provision, both for bike storage and charging points for bikes and scooters and for electric cars. But on balance, I think it's a pretty good application. I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Councillor Dent. Thank you. Okay, it's a debate, so I know I don't have to ask a question. Thank you very much. I do agree with Councillor Sutton on this. Okay, I do think it is a good application in most ways. Okay, I'm quite concerned about the trees. There are 6 trees, there are only 4 there now. How many have been knocked down already? And that, I'd just like to know why that was. I have had a call from a resident in Anfield Road about that, and I said I would bring that up. Okay, about the affordable housing, that is my biggest worry. Evertree is jam-packed with residences. We need more housing, affordable housing in Evertree. So I do think that is something that we really have to sort of hammer home I'm a bit concerned, okay, if the trees, whoever's knocked the trees down, but also about the housing and the developer saying about the, I can't remember the DBB or whatever it was, using that. I hope it's not an excuse so that he doesn't have to do that. I want to support it, but I would like to listen as well to the developers as well, and then I can ask some more questions. Aren't they here? No. I think I'm not, you know, I think that's not bad actually. And perhaps, yeah, and perhaps that's the reason why I'm even more concerned now if the developer can't turn up to his own planning application, then I do seriously think that there's something wrong.
I think it's important to explain that you have the right to come and speak in objection or favour, or anyone does, and if someone wanted to speak in favour ahead of them, they would not have the right to come because they got to us first. So it's, you know, it's not necessary, it's not compulsory, it's not cool, we haven't asked them to come, they can choose to come. So I share your opinion, but just to make it clear, they've not refused to come, they just didn't want to. Councillor Moore, and then Councillor Williams.
Thank you. I would like to move that the condition is added to require the developer to provide a sustainable travel plan and provide provision for electric bike parking in a similar ratio to cars. Anybody like to second that?
I get so that
Come on, as long as we've got someone raising it and seconding it, that's fine. Councillor Williams, I think you've got a condition as well.
Yes, under recommendation in section 18, part A, where it's got delegated authority to the service and leading city development, I'd like to add, in consultation with the chair of planning and portfolio holder, and then it's grant permission subject to the completion of a legal agreement under section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990 as amended to secure the following. And I think that may allay members' concerns over the affordable housing element if we have our chair and portfolio holder involved in that decision with the planning board.
Would anybody like to second that? Thank you. Take your pick. Everyone did, I think, is Howard, so go for it. And Councillor Mitchell, did you want to?
Support Councillor Williams, or if I have seconded, I would like to have seconded it. In relation to that, my only concern is, and I don't know if you can get a reassurance from either yourself or the officer, that in regard to it's quite an interesting site and an interesting development, that we aren't going to get a situation where we're going to get an off-site payment as against housing on-site. Because my concern is just accumulating funds in the pot isn't solving the problem. It's getting the right sites and the right buildings on them.
Has anyone got any response to that? Because now I can't remember what's happening with this site.
We're very aware that we need to get the right style of houses, design, etc. on here. Condition 4 removes rights for people to alter them, essentially. So Emma has worked very hard to make sure that we get a layout and design that we're happy with. And as I say, condition 4 should hopefully give comfort that you won't get that creep of alterations after the event, because they have to come back to us with
Your question is, I want that social housing, affordable housing on the site. I don't want to be offered money in lieu, and this is my worry. That this style of development might be one where a developer feels more comfortable making a payment than providing housing.
My apologies, sorry, I'm finding it hard to hear. But yeah, I refer back to the comment earlier that it's something for negotiation, but I take on board the comment of the member.
Yeah, I think you all understand the situation, and I promise you that I will be trying my best to get as much as I can on any site. Thank you, Councillor Howard.
Well, thank you to Caroline. I very much support the proposal for you to be directly involved in the negotiations and representing the members in that. But I think what we essentially are being told is there isn't going to be any affordable housing on site. We're not going to get those units on site because the interpretation policy and the issue here about the empty homes issue is that if we pass this today, we're not getting that, we're getting another off-site contribution, and it really goes back to what I think Councillor Denning has been talking about, is, you know, and I've been there, you know, and things were a bit different when I was doing it. The market in Exeter wasn't so tight, we used to buy things off the peg and couple pot things in with partners, and again, I just think it's a really dangerous precedent that, you know, within the report, you know, what happens, how do we keep Heaventry or some of these more built-up areas sustainable? You know, can't afford to get on that labour market. I mean, I know, for example, in Heaventry, with another hat on, there are issues around care workers and essential staff and key workers being in that community. So, for example, they can walk to their clients in the area rather than drive or cycle as well, I guess. You know, so there's all sorts of issues here, and that's the whole point of it, Chair, isn't it? That we need balanced communities with affordable and social housing embedded into those communities, not somewhere else. Maybe, I mean, who knows? I mean, I mean, I'm rather an interesting situation with Cranbrook this week, but anyway, is that, you know, where would the affordable housing be? Would it be on the outskirts of the city? Would it even be in Cranbrook? Where would it be? And I think if we go down this route, I think, and also taking on board the comments of Councillor Sheldon about some of the design and the issues around charging points, I'm sorry, Chair, I will be against this application.
For clarity, when the money is given, it's put into a pot, it's put into 106 pot, and then usually, Councillor Williams or Councillor Wright come to me with my pot and they say, we'd like to buy these houses, and they aren't in Cranbrook, they aren't outside of the city, they reference a lot of sites within the city, so we're not sending our affordable housing out of the city. Nothing like that does happen. If you are not happy with the affordable housing on this site, I'm not happy to continue the debate here. We can defer this application and bring you back fine if you don't want me to be the person who decides it, but I'm not happy to continue this conversation at this time in a public forum. That makes sense? So you lot make the decision, because it's not my decision to make this committee, but I'd like to be guided by you where you'd like me to take this. Either we allow me to make the decision with the officers, or we can defer it until we know where we stand with the affordable housing.
Over to you, Ray. I've got 2 amendments and 2 additions.
We've got
point of clarification.
Yeah, you've got 2 conditions. One's about the charging points and the green travel plan, and one is about me signing off the final decision on affordable housing. So that would happen with me. Or if you're really concerned that we can't relay your fears because I don't want to debate this in a public forum, we can defer and bring the application back to you when we know what it looks like, but I'm not happy to continue the debate in that way. So that's 2 people suggesting deferral. So it's kind of all those in favour of the deferral, or you can choose to approve with the conditions, okay? So all those in favour of a deferral, please raise your hand. Yeah, I've taken it as you 2 have done that. So all those in favour of deferral, that's 3. All of those against the deferral. So we are making a decision. I'm assuming Councillor Henson's abstaining. Right. I've properly turned into a primary school teacher, sorry. In which case we move ahead, unless anyone wants to speak some more on the actual application. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. Just want to pick up on Councillor Denning's points. Can it be put back in the strongest terms that if the developer has already cut down trees for planning application, that's not acceptable?
Yeah. And I don't know, Emily, you can go back to the developers and just have a chat with them on that.
Sorry, I just have my microphone for that, so the office is going to talk to them. In which case, I'd like to move to the vote on the substantive recommendation with the amendments, which is that we condition that the recommendation reads that I am consulted on any decision, so it's not made without me, and that we condition the green travel ban and the charging. Yeah? So, yeah.
And conditions about the waste as well.
And waste, yes, thank you. There we go, we've got all of them today. So all those in favour of the recommendation that I've just given? Thank you.
6
page.
Then I'm assuming we've got 2 against? Yeah. And then an abstention from Councillor Henson. That's the end of that application, so on to the final application of the evening. I'll just have a quick shuffle around while we do different offices, move to different places. It'll be a minute or so don't go too far. So our final application of the evening is planning application 211701/Act, land for residential development at Hillbarton Farm, Hillbarton Road, Exeter, and Mike Higgins will be presenting. Oh, have we not got we've got a screen yet, sorry, I've jumped the gun. Talk amongst yourself for a minute.
On my screen.
And Mr. Michael Higgins will present.
Okay. I'm going to move that this way. So this is an outline application for land at Hillbarton. It's an outline application for up to 285 dwellings, with all matters reserved for future consideration, including access, appearance, landscaping, layout and scale. This slide shows you the application site outlined in red to the north of to the top of the slide, and the land outlined in blue is land that's also within the control of the applicants and delineates the site of the former outline consent, as I'll call it, because it's now expired. It was the original Hillbarton consent. There's an aerial photograph of the site, so the bit that we're talking about is a sort of arrow that's hovering around. And I've got a series of photographs looking across the site, and the images, the map images in the corner of the pictures shows you where the photograph, the raw location of the photograph and direction it was taken in. So that's from Cranbrook Walk, which is part of the former David Wilson development, looking down across towards the site in the very bottom, beyond the trees. Site looking back across the top part of the site towards properties in Woodland Road. That's from a very similar position, but turning to the right and looking down along the hedgerow towards the main part of the site. That's one
from Woodland Road itself, looking across to the hedgerow. And again, from a similar position, but again turning to look at the larger part of the site, across the site basically. And final one from further back on Woodland Road, so you can just see how Woodland Road ends with a small grass bank that separates it from the current site. As a plan showing the development plan status, the plan on the left shows that in the original local plan it was a landscape setting, which essentially became superseded in the core strategy when it became one of the strategic allocations for development for residential. Now I've tried, this is a bit of a complicated slide, but it's trying to put the site in a bit more context. I think the last time we brought an application to the committee for the blue land, there was an expression that it would be useful to have a bit more context to the site so that it was able to be better understood in terms of how it related to everything. So you'll see that I've identified where the original local centre was likely to be in the originally consented outline scheme, which is in the bottom left-hand corner, along with the reserved railhold land, which has been secured through the original outline and section 106 that went with that. And the green is earlier phases that are being built out. The blue, as I said, is the consented vestry site, which is under construction. Next to that, there's the consented Persimmon site, which is also under construction. And those two sites will in themselves deliver part of the spine road that gets to the current application site. And then finally, the Met Office is the large sort of building with the white arrow pointing towards it. So hopefully that enables everyone to sort of understand the context of the site a bit better. It's basically a brief overview of the proposal. So as I said, it was up to 285 dwellings. Location of access points I will show you in a moment. Access is reserved, so they are indicated access points, but they haven't actually designed the junctions. 35% affordable housing, a scheme that includes open space, including equipped play areas and a mugger. So this is the access and permeability plan, so that shows, if I hover the arrow, that's one access point. So this grey road here is consented through the earlier phases. So there will be an access off that and there, another one here to get into this part of the site, and then obviously internal roads serving the rest of it. And then you've got permeability in terms of pedestrian access points at the top here. And this one here is another pedestrian cycle access point with a potential emergency vehicle access via Woodland Road as well. That's an outline master plan, which I've just put in because it has been submitted. It is outlined, so it isn't. We're not approving that layout in any shape or form, but it's an indication of a way in which the developer sees the site could be developed. One of the key issues on the site is open space provision, and that's because, like I say, there was an original outline consent that covered all of this land that you can see in various different colours. And through the various phases, open space has been provided to some degree, but also with a recognition that a lot of the open space to serve the overall development would come towards the end of the development as part of the final phase. So what we've sought to do to ensure that we actually get the amount of open space we would expect to see across the whole site, i.e. the 10% that is covered in our policy, I've asked the developer to quantify what's being developed and delivered in terms of open space across the various phases. And this plan shows that. So the little orange bits are the bits of open space that we have agreed can count towards that 10%. There are some that we put forward that we had a debate about and we didn't let them count. So this is effectively the worst case scenario, but that drawing demonstrates that overall we're achieving just over 12% open space. This is an open space parameters plan, so although I've said the layout of the housing and everything else isn't to be approved as part of this application, this is a parameters plan for open space, which shows 3 different colours of open space. The purple bit containing the equipped play areas and the mugger, the orange bit being part of a sort of trim trail green route through the site, and then the blue area in the south being other open space with a small lap in it and a picnic area. Those areas are quantified. Maybe you can see it better on your screen than I can, but they have an area allocated to them in terms of square meterage, which we will cover in 106 to ensure that we get that amount of open space. This is a plan in terms of potential delivery of that open space. What we don't want is it all left, given that it's in the final phase, we don't want it left till the final part of the final phase. There are logistical problems in terms of how you can develop this site. There's lots of infrastructure to go in, surface water attenuation, drainage, and the slope of the site itself dictates partly how you will build it out. So we've had a lot of negotiations with the developer about these triggers. It won't surprise members to note that we've had some debate with me saying it should be earlier and the developer saying it should be later. But this is a negotiated compromise that we've come to, which we believe is reasonable, and again this will be covered in condition in section 106. Just need to do a little bit of, there's been 4 representations. They are summarised in the main report, as are all the key issues. I'll run through them very briefly. The first one is principle of development, and I've referred in the report to the previous history and the context of that in terms of the acceptability of this development in principle. Access and transportation matters, which I've concluded in the report, are the proposal is consistent with the previous outline and the way we envisaged Hillbarton being developed. Affordable housing, the report identified that it will be policy compliant in terms of the provision. Scale, design, impact and character and appearance of the area and open space. As I've said, it is outlined, so no details at this stage, but there's no reason why acceptable reserve matters proposal shouldn't be achievable, securing the open space that I talked about on the previous slides. Impact on trees and biodiversity, perimeter hedgerows to be retained as a condition proposed requiring a biodiversity mitigation enhancement plan and habitats mitigation to be secured through SIL. Heritage assets, which I've identified will be covered appropriately by a condition that's been agreed with the Heritage Officer. And in terms of flood risk and surface water management, there's no fundamental impediment to permission being granted and no objection from the lead local flood authority. Sustainable construction and energy conservation. This site will be connected to district heating as have earlier phases been, and will have our standard condition in terms of energy efficiency construction. Economic benefits are identified in the report, where there's the list of section 106 contributions that cover matters including education, transportation, GP services, habitats mitigation in relation to affordable housing, because that's not covered by SIL, affordable housing itself and construction related jobs. There's been one very late representation received this morning, which I'm not going to read to you because it's very lengthy, but I'll summarise it for you. But it's basically querying that the application should be subject to an environmental statement as an EIA development, questions impact of the scheme from a traffic, air quality and noise impact perspective. And it goes on to talk about, which I'll touch on in a minute, but without the road link to Oberon Road, it questions whether assumptions on how this scheme will be delivered without that connection, in which case the impact on those 3 matters could be worse than envisaged. States that DCC require the Oberon Road link, but haven't gone as far as requiring it in their recommendation on this application. It talks about the lack of local retail facilities in the train station and bus routes. Without an Oberon Road link, it suggests that the proposal is contrary to the development plan.
and that it represents a fundamental change to the access strategy for the Hill Barton area. States that they've taken legal advice and feel that any decision to approve would be legally challengeable and have stated an intention to do so in the event that it is approved. Commenting on that late representation, from an officer perspective, traffic, air quality and noise impacts are all appropriately considered. There have been no objections from the Highway Authority or National Highways, formerly Highways England, nor Environmental Health. The original outline had an environmental statement and assessed up to 750 dwellings. All the other consents granted to date and the delivery of the maximum number of dwellings comprised in this application would only deliver circa 813 dwellings. It's not considered to be a significant increase nor trigger the need for an environmental statement. We've had a late, because it was late, we've only been able to seek a view on that from the Highway Authority. And they have come back and said that the roundabout off Hill Barton Road was assessed as being suitable to serve up to 850 dwellings. And that there's also, I wanted to point out, there's an alternative means of access into this site via Peckham Avenue as well. And they conclude that it remains the Highway Authority's view that whilst a link to Oberon Road would have merit, particularly for pedestrians and cyclists, it is not essential for the development to proceed. Touching on that point, I'll just go back and say that this scheme doesn't actually preclude that link to Oberon Road. And, oops, sorry. Yeah, I'm just about to. this arrow is now travelling along what would be an internal road, we call it the link road, and that's the point where it would connect to Oberon Road. And there is a condition proposed in the officer recommendation that requires that road to be constructed up to the applicant's ownership boundary. So it doesn't preclude that link being delivered, it actually facilitates it. So that brings me to the recommendation, which is one of approval, subject to section 106 that secures the items listed there, which are affordable housing, district heating, open space, GP services, special educational needs, education contribution, transport contribution, habitats mitigation contribution, and then the conditions set out in the report with a couple of minor amendments as set out in the update sheet to conditions 10 and 15 to facilitate the development coming forward in phases and a phased compliance with those conditions. But it's a two-part recommendation. The second part is part B, which is the standard reason for refusal in the event that the satisfactory section 106 isn't completed. That's the end, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone got any questions? I've got Councillor Henson and Councillor Williams.
Can I ask for the map back showing the open spaces, please?
Yep.
On the green.
That one there?
Yes, that's the one. On the green, you're showing that as open space. Is that including the hedgerow? Would that include, because it's not a photograph, it's just a green plot. Yes. Is there a tree line there?
The green is hedgerows and they're not included within the figures for the open space.
It's not included?
They're not included, no.
Right.
The open space figures are only the purple, orange and...
I didn't know, that's my mistake. Can I now talk about the road? The road that goes through and going in through the green space doesn't seem to be extremely wide. Is that wide enough for buses and things like that?
It's only indicative and it would be sorted out at reserve matter stage, the actual design of that road, but it would be envisaged that it was a proper full-width road.
All right. And the quality of houses, have we seen that or not?
No, because it is outlined.
Just outlined,
yes,
yeah.
That's all,
it's
all
just that it seems to be a little cramped, that's all at this stage. Thank you.
You'll see in the report there is an informative about the need to demonstrate a satisfactory design and that the number of, obviously this is a consent for up to 285 dwellings,
And to get that maximum number, they're going to need to convince us through the reserve matters that they can do that in an acceptably designed way.
Thanks. Councillor Williams, next. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. You mentioned mugger, and it's not actually in the paragraph on parks and green spaces. You've got the leap and the neap, and I noticed in the recommendations you've got this thing called a mugger. I've got no idea what mugger is.
All right, okay. Sorry, I'm still... It's a multi-use game down here.
Thank you. Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. And just, you may or may not be able to do this, but in the sort of the amended conditions, you refer to number 10 and number 15 on the additional sheet. I didn't have time to go through it line by line to find out what the amendments were. So could you point out exactly which bits of the wording have changed, so that maybe we can just mark it up?
Short of getting the two out and comparing ones in the update sheet, it would be difficult, but essentially it's the bit that introduces the word splaining. So, whereas it previously said something along the lines of no material should be brought onto the site until something has been done, and now it says no material should be brought onto the site for any phase identified. So it breaks it down to enable it to be complied with the phases rather than starting at the bottom of the site and having to agree the details for the top part of the site that would come later.
I think in an earlier application, when there was an amendment, they underlined the bits that were changed. I think that might be just something that would be really helpful to committee members in future, if any amendments, late amendments were underlined, so we could actually see what they were. So thank you very much for that, for all that you've done on this. Councillor Moore.
Thank you. I have a few points, some of which I've corresponded with you already about. I was concerned about the comments in your report about the development being a very car-led design. So I would like to know about your thoughts on sustainable transport. The train station hasn't been built. If there is no connecting road, there's no chance of the bus ever. Not that it's you get one elsewhere next time. And I'm concerned about the play areas being sort of at the edge again. So I want to know about your thoughts on actually negotiating a development which isn't just designed around sort of cars really. I am concerned that the air quality assessment is out of date based on the 2019 work. Which was earlier then informed by what happened in 2013 when the original master plan was brought forward. So will there be a further air quality assessment and the impact of neighbouring developments as per NPPF advice on the impact of cumulative developments in the area be considered? There was no mention in this report, and we had this discussion when we looked at the neighbouring site, about any community facilities. So these homes are being built when there's a Sainsbury's further up and obviously Ellen Tinkham School next door, but there doesn't seem to be any community facilities on the whole of the site. Can you just clarify that? I am concerned about this, what powers does the committee have to require more than one entrance and exit to this development, because if there isn't any out on another route, and the route gets blocked. This is a very long way from the entrance to the main road. So I am really concerned that it's just Devon County Council saying that's up to the developer if they want to, and if they don't want to, that's fine. Thank you.
So in terms of the car-led nature of the scheme, like I say, that layout isn't being approved. It is only feasibility layout. We've already had discussions with the developer to say that we're not convinced by that layout. So when your reserve matters comes forward, you're going to have to convince us that the number of dwellings that you're proposing in those reserve matters delivers a good quality design that isn't car-led, and that's something we'll be looking at when those reserve matters applications are submitted. In terms of the play areas, yes, I can't deny they are at the bottom of the site and the top of the site, but to some extent that's how we've always envisaged Hill Barton being developed, and the approach with the earlier phases has always been that this would be how it would be delivered. And I think if you look back at earlier phases, the application plans that were submitted then would have had very similar plans to these in terms of how that open space would come forward ultimately. So it's consistent with those, and I think in the way that it has been developed in phases, it's an acceptable approach. If you're asking for an officer opinion on that issue. In terms of air quality, there is no proposals for a further report to be submitted. The report that has been submitted has considered those issues, has considered cumulative impacts, and the environmental health officer has had her query satisfied and is happy from an air quality perspective and hasn't raised an objection on that matter. And finally, in terms of community facilities, you're right, there aren't any proposed as part of this phase, but there weren't any in the original outline either, so it's consistent with that. The outline had, I think I need the slide with the arrows on. So the outline that was consented had the local centre that's shown by the orange arrow in the bottom left-hand corner. That was part of the outline. That land is still there and could still be developed for a local centre as part of another application. But you're right, there aren't any proposals within this housing layout for community facilities other than the open space. But that's not a reason for refusal. Hopefully that's all.
The access points.
Oh, the access points, yeah. Well, like I say, this is only an indicative layout, but you'll see that annotation number 5 there. That is the potential connection point to Oberon Road, and as I say, one of the conditions recommended in the report is that that road will be constructed up to that boundary by the applicant, so it doesn't preclude it in the future. I don't think it's reasonable to say that this developer has to make that connection point beyond their site, and that's the position of the county as highway authority.
Okay, before we move on to Councillor Mitchell and Councillor Hannaford, can I just remind everybody that this is an outline planning application for the construction of 285 dwellings with all matters reserved. So we're looking at a plan that could or may not be. It's when it comes to reserved matter stage that those decisions will be made. And I'm quite sure as the developers are sat in the room, they're probably getting a good idea of what we want to hear on it, okay? Councillor Mitchell and then Councillor Hannaford.
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the 285 figure, in what way does that density of 285 on this site compare to what's already been built in the other two sites and the one beside it? Is it consistent, or is it the higher end or the lower end of what's being built elsewhere?
I would say, I haven't got the figures, so I'm not going to say this is gospel, but I would say it's very similar to the Vistry site. Looking at the layout. In fact, on that slide there you can see part of the approved Vistry site in the left-hand bottom corner, where Harry's just circling with the arrow. It's a very similar density now, I would say.
So if the developer came back with a lower number, there is no issue to provide in this application. If the developer comes back with a higher number than 285, is that seen as an amendment or a fresh application?
That would be a fresh application.
Right. And how, when you've got, as a planner, when you've got a series of developments like this, that are like a jigsaw arrangement, how do you as a planner actually give any sense of community?
Well, I think it comes to some extent, it'll come through the development of the open space, because although it has been left, a lot of it has been left to the last phase, once it is provided, residents from the whole development will be going across to the Mugger, to the Neep, and the Leap, and using that green route through the site. I think that will help. Like I said, there is no specific community hall or anything like that, but that open space, I think, will help to perform that function and draw the development together.
Finally, Councillor Hannaford, I think.
Thank you, Chair. And my points of clarification really go to the heart of what you have just been saying in regard to what is an outline on an application and what's left to reserve matters. But I think page 89 really is quite devastating really, and it begins along the lines of there are however significant concerns related to the submitted layout, which is worth highlighting, and then each paragraph sort of comes in, quoting, as Councillor Moore said, car-dominated long stretches of parking, the overall layout complies with flats and apartments sufficient private amenity, and then it goes on to the final bit about given concerns about the layouts and the roads, etc., etc. And in a way, it goes to the nature of what we are here today doing as a planning committee and members. You know, we are looking to approve potentially this development, but some of the fundamental concerns here about how it's actually going to look, how it's going to operate, the layout of the roads, again, we are delegating to you. But in a sense, you know, these concerns on 89, page 89, just seem so fundamental. And what if they're not addressed? What if we end up with a fully designed development, and as been alluded to, is car-led and so on and so forth. So I think, you know, from the outline to the reserve matters, again, it is a difficult balance, and I just think some of these concerns are so fundamental. What are we actually approving here, and what it will look like? And I just don't. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to just take it back to basics. You know,
what you're approving is the concept of that many houses on the site. What I'd like to assume is that if anything looked like the concerns that the officer has raised, first of all, it never comes back to committee at that stage. I wouldn't want to see it at that stage, but it may do, you know, because everyone's got the right to have this heard here at committee. But that's the point at which, if there are fundamental planning reasons why we can't apply, you know, we refuse it. That's the brutal but true.
Chair, looking at page 89, these concerns are so sweeping and fundamental. I would seek from the officers in the reserve matters, you know, is that actually robustly reflected in there? And again, what are we being approved, asked to give approval today, even at an outline stage? Is it fit for purpose? Should this, if these concerns go to the heart of the development, how it looks, how it could be laid out, is it sustainable? We've already turned down elsewhere car-led developments around rentals, for example. We're told here at the moment what is in front of us is a car-led development and we're not happy about the street scene, etc., etc. I won't even go into the fact the play area is on the edge of the area again, and I won't even go into the fact that I think it's completely unacceptable that this community space has not been developed, and I can give you that chapter and verse. I'm just going right back to page 89. Should this application be before us today, because there are such fundamental concerns outlined by our own officers about the layout of the roads and its sustainability?
I'm going to let the officer respond to that, rather than me get myself into a circle of argument with you.
Okay, well it is because it is exactly that. It is an outline application, and all you are approving is the principle of development for up to that number of dwellings. So the purpose of the reserve matters is that is when those issues get debated in their finer points in terms of the layout, the road layout, where the parking goes, how much parking, what mix of dwellings, garden sizes, internal space standards, all of that will be looked at as part of those reserve matters, and we as officers will be looking to get that right. And if we're not satisfied, it's highly likely that we would seek a delegated authority to refuse it even. But based on previous reserve matters on the Hill Bottom site, there's always been objections anyway that's led to the reserve matters coming back to committee for determination in any event. Sorry.
Okay.
Just a quick thought, Chair. Looking at the objections, there's only been 4 objections to this application. So it's a new community, it takes time to gel. So, you know, again...
it's come to us with only 4 objections because the officer thinks it's important enough. And I'm pretty sure it did come through delegate briefing for our opinion. I can't remember. There's so many in your button, but, you know, the system is set up. The officers do know when something may not be controversial in the sense that we've had a lot of objections, but it's important, it seems. You know, I think we know this system well. The big thing to remember is the reason it's in front of us is because we approved a local plan that allowed housing development on this site. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. And I think you won't get cross with me asking the question, but I don't quite understand. On your map, you very helpfully have those different coloured arrows, and I'm very interested in the brown arrows, which indicated the possibility, yes, local centre. And I think at many meetings of this committee, we have been very concerned about providing local centres for these larger developments. And what I'm not quite clear about, but what I suspect is that we've had this sort of very piecemeal development within a sort of a master plan, and we've ended up with one key feature, which is the local centre, not yet developed, which is absolutely essential as part of the green spaces as well for building communities. So it looks to me as if we could end up approving this, but we may never see this local centre. So is it possible for us to ask the developers to rethink and have that as part of this, or is it that completely, out of order? So, apologies, Chair, if it is.
I think the simple answer is that you have to consider the application that's before you, and that's an outline application for the land in red. Edged in red on that slide. The reserve railhold land is already secured, so that's that brown arrow. The other one, the local centre, that's in there because the original outline that covered all the whole Kilbarton site was for X number of houses and a local centre. The fact that land is still green at the moment means that you could get an application tomorrow for a local centre on it, but equally you might get an application for housing on it. So I'm not going to say to you that it will definitely come forward, but I don't think it has a direct bearing on the determination of this application, which you have to look at, which is the application, the red line side, which is an application that's been submitted and needs to be determined on its merits.
Thank you. I think
just ask a small question, please.
It's
slightly something you have, Councillor, just mentioned. I understand because the committee has changed where one is meeting, such as just the ward councillors, we're on the next move. I'm looking for the word and I've lost it. Delegated briefing. That will be just coming back to the three officers. Now, the fact that I'm concerned is that we have known, as now, normally we would see the design on delegated powers. That now doesn't exist. And I'm worried that what are we here for is the fact is to decide on these things. I know this is master plan, and I know because we agreed it years ago. But the fact remains is then, if it's left to delegated powers, to the three councillors of the ward, which we've now granted, the rest of us have no say in it. Because it's not to delegated powers.
The decision whether it goes to committee or not will be decided at delegated powers, won't it? Realistically, it's either refused, approved, or it comes to committee. If you like, I'm sure there is a way of putting something into the outline application that says that the reserved matters for this application has to come to committee. So that's not a problem. I think it's very unlikely that an application of this scale, with this many houses, would be approved at delegated briefing. I've not seen it done, and I've been sitting in on it for 18 months, and I've been on this committee for much, much longer. So I'd be surprised to see an application of this scale. One's in Hemphill Road, something like that. That's the one where it's more, do we bring it or don't we bring it? And we chose to bring it today. But this application is highly unlikely that it won't come to a planning committee unless it's just refused. Okay? So I just want to reassure you, there's nothing happening. You're all allowed to attend delegated briefing. You're allowed to watch what we're doing. Just because you're not able to speak on items that aren't in your area doesn't mean we're doing it in secret. We're not. We do it in front of you. You're all allowed to attend, and it's all minuted. I can't see an application of this size unless it was just a flat refusal, not coming to committee. Okay? So I think we have to trust a bit in the officers. I know I think we're quite contrary this evening. I don't know, maybe we're all just excited we're not canvassing. But we need to maybe just start to focus on the application and deciding it rather than talk around the process of the planning committees at the moment. Councillor Sutton, please make it quick.
In the interest of moving this forward, I think we're possibly kind of losing sight of what we're doing here. We're being asked to outline, to approve or not, an outline application with all matters reserved, and really just to back up your comments just now, I think given the debate, the officers have very clearly heard. Yeah, but you know, really, can we move this on, guys, please? Because frankly, canvassing is starting to look quite attractive.
On which now? I would like to go. Yeah, sorry.
I want us to move on, but I have one technical point I just want to cover off. Mike mentioned a very late representation we had today, and Mike mentioned the threat of legal challenge, etc. So I just want to give assurance really on the situation. Now, certain developments are environmental impact assessment caught by the regulations of 2017. This application is classed in Schedule 2 as an urban development. It's over the 5 hectares threshold and it's over the 150 dwelling threshold. Okay, so we then, as a council, have to judge whether we want an environmental statement, and therefore that application is caught by those regulations. Now, as Mike said, issues such as noise, air quality, etc., all those key environmental issues were submitted with the application. So we were satisfied that we didn't need an environmental statement as well as what was already submitted. So Howard, hopefully you've caught all of that. So I just wanted it to be clear for the minutes really that we've been through that process, we've made a judgment, and here we are today bringing it to you for a decision.
Councillor speaking under Standing Order number 44 is Councillor Harvey. You know how it all goes. Away you go, Councillor Harvey.
Crikey, I never expected that level of debate about this application. I was hoping that I'd have to do it all, but clearly you all stepped in for me. I haven't really got very much to say to add to all of that, except that the context of this application is absolutely vital. This is the last application in the Monckton Master Plan, and we need as a council to ensure that everything that we want to be delivered in the Monckton Master Plan is being delivered. Councillor Hannaford talked about what's the shape of it, what it does look like, where's it going to go. Well, there are 2 pieces of work which inform this particular application to my mind. One you've talked about already tonight, which is the Monckton Master Plan, which is photographed up from there. But the second is Devon's Pinhole Area Access Strategy 2013 and amended 2019. So I'll talk about the transport elements of it all first, and the Monckton Master Plan. The Monckton Master Plan required the Oberon Road link. Now, I'm advised that the County Council, the Highways, have now decided that is not the case. But to me, it is absolutely vital, because there is no eastern entrance or exit to this site, which means that every single vehicle at the eastern side of this development will have to drive all the way across the western side of the development in order to get out. They'll probably turn left or right. They'll turn right if they want to go north of the M5, and then turn left if they want to go south down the M5 to junction 30. But all those traffic movements in that site will have been created by the lack of that exit out onto Oberon Road. Those movements will have been created deliberately. The Pinhole Area Access Strategy talks about a half-hourly service through Pinhole Station. Years away, according to Great Western Rail, they simply haven't got any train drivers. Everything else has been done. It's in the shadow timetable. Network Rail have approved it. It's all to do with the Barnstable line and trains being stapled at St James's. But years away, according to First Great Western. Hill Barton Railway Station. Well, that's in both the master plan and the Pinhole Area Access. It's just that down the bottom of the corner, reserved rail halt land. Again, that is just so far away, it's not true. There's £500,000 suggested for travel planning, cycling and walking, and travel planning, plus bus usage. Well, I'll tell you about the Pinhole Area Access Strategy. It mentions buses 5 times, and I've been here before on many occasions saying, bus service, fine. Somebody builds the houses, and then the bus service disappears. What's going to happen next? Councillor Hannaford knows what I'm going to say next. I'm going to read out the Hattock resolution from last Tuesday, which described how councillors feel. This is a county council committee, Hattock. It's not an Exeter City Council committee. Hattock, on the 12th of April, resolved, after listening to members and public statements, that Exeter Hattock concludes that the bus service in Exeter and its travel to work area is currently not fit for purpose. Never mind building more houses, it's not fit for purpose now. Impact reasons. Impact on vulnerable users of buses being cancelled without notice. Safety of women and girls when the last bus of the day fails to turn up. Failure of the Stagecoach Chapter to provide reliable, up-to-date, real-time bus information. Lack of zero-emission buses, particularly on routes in the city centre and heavy traffic arterial routes. Disappointing level of funding allocated to the government's bus improvement strategy. Ongoing bus driver recruitment and retention issues, and a recently reduced timetable that has drastically cut the scheduled bus service for many of the areas of the city. The committee therefore concludes the service cannot be made fit for purpose under the current legislative framework and believes that local councils must have the power to set local requirements on timetables, fares and routes for the benefit of its residents, and therefore calls for Devon County Council to press the bus franchise agreement to be an essential part of any Devon Delusion deal, and that in addition to the above, Cabinet requested to see how we could work on a marketing campaign in partnership with Stagecoach and other local bus operators to increase patronage on local services following the reduction in patronage after pandemic restrictions. So, I'm confused. A Devon committee tells me the bus service is awful, but yet Devon Highways were requested to comment on planning applications saying we'll use buses. Doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know about you, but it certainly doesn't make any sense to me. So that's a brief run through of the traffic issues. Right, so let's have a look at some of the open space issues, shall we? The Munkerton Master Plan says that there should be one allotment for every 100 houses. There aren't any. The Munkerton Master Plan says there should be playing fields, full-size playing fields. There aren't any. There's discussion here about play areas. This is where I'm going to be. There's discussion here about play areas, muggers, neeps, leaps, etc., etc., etc. But as I started, this is our last opportunity to make sure that the City of Exeter and these new residents achieve what is needed to be achieved, what we laid out in our master plan in 2013, what the residents of Exeter said we needed to have in 2013, and we are not having it delivered by this planning application. Thank you.
Finally, supporter speaking on behalf of the application is Peter Salter. Peter, you've got 3 minutes and we'll give you a shout when your time is up.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. My name is Peter Salter and I'm here to represent this application. I'd like to start by thanking Mike for his hard work in bringing this site to the committee. The Hill Parton development has spanned quite a few years, and as you are aware, this is the final part, which importantly provides certain delivery of the Ridgetop Park and the substantial play areas and equipment for the existing residents. In addition, it makes a sizable contribution to Exeter's housing supply, and up to 100 affordable dwellings, of which 70 would be socially rented, along with a substantial contribution towards education, transport and habitat mitigation. Thank you for your time, and I hope members will be able to support the application. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Does anybody have any questions? Councillor Moore.
I wonder if you could clear up a discussion point. will you definitely or definitely not be making a connection to Oberlin Road? And secondly, where will you be putting the allotments? Thank you.
The connection to Oberon Road, we will take the road to our boundary. We don't own the land beyond our boundary. But the discussions with Devon County was that if they wanted it as a strategic route, they would CPO that land. And no, there's no allotments, but the actual open space quantum of that particular site is 20%. I know Mike's given the figure for the whole site, the earlier phases, but on this particular site, there's 20% open space. But no allotments, I'm sorry, no.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. Going to move this into debate, but before we begin, just going to read out what the recommendation is for. Okay? It is an outline planning application with all matters reserved. So, Oberon Way, no one's saying it's a bad idea, still a reserved matter. The design of the houses, no one's saying it should be packed in and be ugly, it's still a reserved matter. And the open space, which includes a ridgeline park in the current proposal and was Pete Edwards' master plan for this area, I'd be really disappointed if we don't see 12% come before us, according to Mike's figures, not someone else's figures, and that we don't see decent wedges of land rather than little bits here and there put inside it. I'm happy to approve this application. This is my input to it because it's part of our local plan, because it's always been seen for development, because the last time we had a development for us, we had the whole debate about community facilities, which no one thinks is a bad idea, but we are where we are, and there are other facilities that did exist before this development took place, and they aren't long distances away. Some of them are, but some are literally across the road in Whitton. So I'm happy to support this application, but I think Mike and whichever officers get to look at it in the future will very much see the minutes of this meeting and know how we feel about it. Would anyone else like to speak? Because I do encourage you to. I'm not betting into it, I just want to get my bit out. Thank you, Councillor Richard.
I'm seconding you proposing
that position, Madam Chair. In some way, this developer being at the end of the chain, picking up all the problems that have occurred on this development and master plan all the way through. My concern is, and you've reassured us, that when reserved matters are dealt with, they'll be brought back to this committee, because it is such a large-scale development, it needs to be looked at by the whole committee, not by a small group. I've got that reassurance from the chair, and I'm happy to accept her reassurance. If she'd like to include it within the motion, I'd be happy to accept that.
Ensure that all the reserved matter application comes to committee, because there are no way of adding matters.
I don't see any reason why we couldn't. We can give you that assurance that that will happen.
As long as that's recorded in the minutes, more than happy on Madam Chair on that. And I just wish that we could find a way of developing communities instead of estates.
Thank you, Chair. Reference page 88, affordable housing, and this application does have some reasons to commend itself, and it's refreshing this evening that our third application actually includes some on-site affordable housing, and I think the negotiation that's outlined here, where a number of this is first-time buyers, I think we're all very conscious that in order to solve the housing crisis, we do need a diversity of solutions, and they will help some people that can't get onto our social housing register, unfortunately. So I think there is merit in that, and I think that strikes the right balance towards this being a balanced community. I do accept that this is in the master plan. I do accept it also meets our housing supply, and particularly for the matters I've just referred to, I do think it commends itself for approval. However, I would still seek some assurance on the points that Councillor Harvey has made, and of course we're judging this on an application on its own merits, but it cannot be unlinked from the fact that it is the final part of the jigsaw. There are issues around access, there are issues about the delivery of community facilities, and you have things in our master plan, such as the allotments, such as the access and funneling things through. I think another part of this development a while ago, we had the debate about the accessibility of the play areas and where people were expected to go in terms of, was it family friendly. So I think I will go with approval personally on this, but I do hope that this does come back to committee, and I don't know if it's here or somewhere else. I think we've got to have some sort of mechanism or device, and even maybe that needs to go into, maybe it isn't right for this application, to work with the local members to see how and when these community facilities that are absolutely essential will be delivered. Because God forbid we approve this tonight and then the footprint, as Councillor Williams has outlined, for community spaces then also gets developed for housing, because then we aren't just building homes and we're not building communities. This is such an important site. We want it to work, we want it to be an attractive place to live, and we don't want it to be just a sea of houses without any soul or community heart in it.
If everybody's happy, I'd like to move to the vote on this. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Any against? And there are no abstentions. Unfortunately, we're not quite done yet, people. So, item 8 on the agenda is the list of decisions made and withdrawn applications. Director of Planning.
Nothing to add, thank you.
Thank you. No one has been in touch. I'm aware there's an appeals report which includes 2 small appeals. Anything else you want to add to that, Harry?
Just that in total we've got 198 potential dwellings at appeal at the moment, and one application is probably going to go there, so it may be up to 298 dwellings going through the appeal process. I'll keep the committee informed.
Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for your patience. Is the word I'm looking for. And looking forward to seeing most of you. I think should be back. Well, if you're on the committee, you should be back the other side of the